All right. We are here, finally. Starting the show with the one and only, the powerful, the awesome PtitDrogo. This is the Pig Show episode number 15. Welcome and joining us. How are you doing, Drogo?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Well, let's dive straight into it. We were just chatting before, and you just mentioned that you've been actually pretty hardcore vegan for 2 years now, and I didn't even know that. And I was like, whoa, what the hell? I was like, stop, don't talk about that anymore. I want this to be on the show. So what prompted you going vegan? I know you went on a bit of a health spree. Was it just for health or?
I do like the introduction. Hi guys, welcome to the StarCraft show. This is Drogo. He's vegan. He's gonna talk about it for 30 minutes now.
This is much more important. We need to know about your eating habits.
Okay. I do want to mention the full story a little bit here, which the reason why I think it's kind of funny that you're asking this is because you've been together with me in the My Infinity house, like back in 2014/15. And back then, my diet was Nutella, salami, and bread, which was pretty much the only food available, like for the players with no money.
Often wasn't even, we can't even call it bread, right? It was like the cheap white toast stuff.
Yeah, everything was so cheap. I did love my life back then, but it was very funny. And no, it wasn't really for health reasons. Just, I've been vegetarian for 2 years. I think ever since I'm 22. It's always around my birthday, funnily enough. But like, when I went to 22 at the Amsterdam Cup, I went home and I started being vegetarian. And I've been vegan ever since I'm 24. For the main reason why, I'm trying to make the story quick because I try to fight the stereotype of the vegan just going on and on and on. But okay, so I'm a fairly big Destiny fan. I follow his content, don't always agree with him. And at some point, I was following a lot of discussion on the discussion of eating meat was often on the table. And back then I was like, oh, neat, like Destiny is going to defend eating meat in a debate against a vegan YouTuber. Dope. The debate goes on, and Destiny's argumentation, while internally consistent, was absolutely psychopath. Like, it sounded like an actual psychopath, and I was like, holy fucking shit, I need to rethink this. And these days, I just think the vegan moral argument is extremely strong. I don't try to push it too much on other people, because it took me a very long time to think about this. And yeah, now I just can't really fight the moral aspect of it, so that's why I just went vegan.
Okay, cool. So it's mostly just the idea of just inflicting pain on other animals, right? That's like the core of it.
It's actually about killing animals. I often have to debate about the pain factor not being really too big of a deal, because then you can try to argue your way to a meat industry that's pain-free but still kills, which I would still not enjoy.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that makes perfect sense. No, I mean, it's kind of a funny thing where recently everyone, just laughs about vegans, right? Because there are the section of them on the internet that are so loud, but
it's also funny too, just quickly, because it's really hard. You don't just want to be chill about it, right? But ever since I went vegan, I really wanted, I didn't want to be in a situation one day where we're like, hey, Drogo, cook for us, and the food I cook is shit. I'm like, that's because he's vegan. So I actually got insanely better at cooking.
Oh, really?
I'm actually pretty fucking good now. Yeah.
Damn, man.
Not super good, but whenever I cook for someone, they're like, what the fuck? This is really good. And not so I'm pretty happy. I things turned out, It's okay now. Life's great.
Dude, that's awesome. I think that's a huge skill as well. It's always funny actually, because so many of us I think have grown up just playing games all day. So I'm steadily seeing my friends go from they're I figured out how to fry an egg. I got it right. I managed to crack the egg without getting shell in it. It was really hard.
Yeah, when we were living together, I literally didn't know how to cook pasta. The concept of boiling water was something I've never touched in my life. So it is pretty funny to see the evolution. I do agree with that.
That's insane, man. So what's the favorite dish? What's your crowning achievement in cooking so far?
Well, my crowning achievement, I still don't have a dish that I really like, that I rarely do just to impress. But in the things that I cook a lot, I don't know, just a bunch of mushroom shits with eggplants with a special spice blend that I really like. Put that over some rice, and
you just cook the vegetables in the oven, or you fry them up, or?
Nah, I'm a pan guy. I just went to YouTube one pan dishes because I'm lazy. That's also when I'm extremely lazy. So Can never
No,
fight that too much.
that's it, dude. The efficiency. I remember like growing up and stuff. Like, you know, my mom would be into like all this classic baking stuff, and she'd do all these different dishes. And like, it's the same thing whenever I'm cooking with my girlfriend. She's like, "Why don't we do this thing?" And I'm like, "You know, that has pastry in it, right? Like, and all this other fancy shit." I'm like, there's like a certain threshold of work to the amount of eating I get to do after cooking
Yeah.
it, where I'm like, oh, I don't know, because you can make some amazing food without that much time
Yeah.
spent on it. But there are some things where it's like the workload and the time invested just goes up exponentially, and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is quite worth it. You can do good stuff just cooking in a fry pan. That's awesome, man.
True.
This is the new Drogo, so less waste man
It,
Drogo.
yeah. Oh no, the new Drogo is pretty healthy. Like really healthy these days, actually. But the waste man aspect is it comes and goes these days. Like right now, I'm in a pretty good spot. But like 3 months ago, at the beginning of the confinement in France because of COVID-19, I was going to bed at 6 a.m. every single day. It's still a thing that I have no self-control in that regard. So sometimes it's gonna be great, sometimes it's not gonna be great.
It's
Depends.
it's just occurred to me like regular milk chocolate has milk in it. So if you can't eat that, do you eat dark chocolate or like what sort of like sweet or like junk food do
You
you
know when
smash?
you're a kid and you're like, man, all of these adults pretending to like dark chocolate, they're just pretending. And
Yep.
and literally 2 months ago, I was like, dude, I want some chocolate. There's only dark chocolate, and I ate some. I was like, that's actually pretty good.
You're like, oh shit, I've got adult taste buds now. I actually enjoy
Yeah, I
like
was like,
the
oh
bitterness doesn't turn
shit,
you off.
man. I became what I hate. No.
We spend our whole lives trying to not become our parents, but eventually it happens anyway. We're like, ah, no.
True.
I think whiskey tastes good now. I like red wine. Ah. Dude, that's
Yeah.
I mean, I think so how old are you now? You're 25?
I'm 24. I will turn 25 at the end of the year in November. So
Awesome.
we're still young.
Still young, man. Many
Yeah.
years to go. I actually just realized I didn't set up our chatbot command to kind of spam out some links. So I'm going to ask the regulars in chat to keep spamming those out. And we'll, of course, have all the links to follow your social media channels and stuff in the description as well on YouTube. But yeah, that's kind of cool to see the different health evolution with different pro gamers. There was definitely a time where if you talk to any pro gamer in StarCraft, it was like, oh, well, you should just try and go from 10 hours practicing a day at your computer to 12 to get better. Whereas now, like, people will be like, oh no, like, you should have more frequent breaks and go for a jog and go study some replays and, you know, have a chill and go outside and reset your brain so you can actually, you know, not be a stressed out guy who's like hunched over his keyboard thinking an extra 2 hours of mindless practice is going to get him wins. um do you think like steadily you've kind of gone to grinding less games like over the years as well? Do you think you play a
I,
lot less?
I'm actually a little bit still, even though I don't practice what I preach, I'm still a little bit of a grind supremacist. I still believe right now that if you want to be the very best, even though grinding a lot is super inefficient in general, I do feel like someone that just play games all day because he fucking loves StarCraft and he just keeps at it, and someone that's like really fishing for that efficiency, even though in theory the guy that's efficient should, prevail. What is gonna prevail is he's gonna prevail at having a better life, but he's not gonna necessarily prevail at being better at StarCraft than the guy that's grinding. So
Hmm.
eventually, grinding 12 hours a day will do things to you. Maybe in the longevity of it, it's not great. But I don't know. I
Do you
still
think that
feel like if you're spending 12 hours a day, it's still
it's
pretty
hard
high.
to compete with passion, right? Yeah, it's
Yeah,
I think that the thing you touched on there, you said like the guy who's like still just loving playing, right? So it's like I feel like there's like a link between you being super focused and kind of problem solving actively as you play if you're inspired, right? If you're enjoying the game,
mm,
even if you're like really struggling in a certain matchup, as long as you've got that passion, you're still going to be trying to like figure things out constantly. So
but
even in the middle of a grinding session, you're probably going to be playing
yeah,
more effectively, right?
yeah. But to be honest, like it's not an exact science for sure. Like the main example I was thinking of in my head right now when I was talking about grinding was Clem. Like Clem right now, he was really really good. And I know for a fact, you can look up his La Liga like page. He plays every single online cup every day, which
Yeah.
is something I could never like conceptualize to do myself.
He
And
came back.
that's really impressive. On the other hand, I'm not quite sure, but I'm pretty sure Serral these days almost only plays custom.
Mm.
Like, he doesn't play a ton of ladder, doesn't play online cup, and in custom you can't play 12 hours a day of custom. You're gonna run out of people to play with like really fast. So
Yeah.
apparently he's a big family man, and he's still like like. I'm also a big Serral supremacist. I think he's the best player in the world. So it's not necessarily, the best player in the world doesn't play 12 hours a day. So there's that. You have to take that into account. It's a lame answer a little bit, just to say that to each of their own, and everybody has to find the best way for them. But it's true. Even though it doesn't really help anybody to say that, it's still very much true.
Well, it's one of those things you can't force yourself to grind like that. Like you'd be like, oh, 12 hours is the best thing to do, and someone who's not passionate about that or doesn't vibe with their way of learning and staying focused, they're just gonna like that grind is worthless, right? But if you're motivated to be on playing every online cup and to, I mean, Clem won EPT America this week at like 7 a.m. France time.
And EPT, yes. Like, EPT ends NA. I used to play it, but now it ends at 7 a.m. And if I was at full power Westman, I could play it, but I'm not at full Westman power right now, so I actually can't play it. I was falling asleep while playing the last time I played it. It was terrible.
Yeah, I saw because you commented in chat after. I remember I do have a bad habit. I'm a little bit mean because you always get emotional as a player. But I always love the drama. I hope you don't mind. I always read out your comments in chat to the audience when we're casting, and you were just like, I was a little confused because you were like, what the fuck, man? This was such a waste of time. Like, and you were saying like, oh, I should go back to like, I should go back to being full waste man or something. And then I was like, wait, aren't you being waste man by being awake at this time? But now it makes more sense. You're like, oh no, I'm trying to force myself to do the waste man schedule. For anyone who's watching, by the way, waste man, we mean literally you go to sleep at like 8 a.m. every morning after being up all night. Practicing, which is 50% watching hentai. I'm pretty sure. Is that correct, Drogo? Or
I'm not sure. That's the thing, because like, if you end at 8 a.m., who do you practice against from midnight to 8 a.m.? That's the main thing I don't like about being a Westman. That in theory, it's actually not efficient for practice. Because there used to be a lot of Westman StarCraft 2 pro players. These days, not so much. The best players play in the morning, which was a big shift in metagame. That was actually drastic.
I had no idea. That's crazy because on Korea, you can't find games before midday Korean time. Like you just can't.
Yeah,
it's impossible.
Koreans are Westman, for sure.
Oh, they're...
But the Europeans are not anymore.
I feel like the Europeans have optimized the schedule because they know they're competing at like 7 to 10 p.m. usually for GSL, right? And they want that to be like their middle of the day / like mid-morning kind of time. And it kind of is. A lot of them like start laddering at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and like they get up at midday or something. I'm like, oh, and I remember thinking, oh, this is a crazy unhealthy schedule. But then I was like, actually, you don't really want to be competing at the end of your day because your energy cycle usually is a little bit lower, right? You'd always rather, like, I feel like you feel better playing group stage 2 at a WCS tournament. If you get to the end of group stage 3 open bracket elimination matches or whatever, and you're playing at midnight at the end of a long day, like you're always going to feel like shit.
Yeah, but to be honest, I remember just using this as an excuse. Like, yeah, I've actually optimized my sleep schedules for my job. I'm a pro gamer, so sometimes online cups can have a very random time. But really, we're just me being a fucking slob, just going to bed extremely late for no real reason. So I'm not sure if the Koreans are that optimized with their life for GSL,
Especially not now outside of the team houses. And even in the team houses, I mean, I'm sure it was different, especially in the Kesper ones. But like when I was living with Prime, it's just so funny because it was like, okay, Maru's in this big Chinese tournament, but he's like 14. So the main coach guy, owner, has to go with him. So there's 2 days with no one supervising the house, and everyone just plays Brood War and League of Legends and like runs around screaming and tickling each other and stuff. And I'm like, what is this? Like, it literally felt like I was in some weird like nobody practiced while the coaches went around, because normally it was like, you're not allowed to play other games, blah blah blah. And every day the coaches would leave the house, everyone would boot up other games and play them. So there's this weird like, we're forcing you to practice hard, but because of that, no one had any kind of self-imposed discipline. And that's part of why when Kesper teams all disbanded, a lot of the players Like some of the best players became way worse. Some of the worst players who struggled in that system actually became way better, like TY.
That's funny. You know, like not a lot of people know that, obviously, because it was a long time ago. But I was in the MVP house way before, like at the very beginning of Legacy of the Void during the beta.
Oh yeah. So that was late 2015, right?
Late 2015, yeah. And it was a very, very first time. It wasn't exactly the same. I remember having a lot of respect for the MVP coach. He was called Shoya, I think. And that guy would play every day. He was actually a coach that would ladder every single day a lot. And he was like rank 150 on the ladder. So, he wasn't pro player level. But he was still Grandmaster on playing every day, on playing the strats he would advise his players to do. And it was just like, I would obviously would not understand what he was saying, but he would always just talk to his players a bunch. Like,
Yeah.
I actually felt there was a decent amount of organization when I was in MVP house.
I think
So
he was one of the
pretty
really
nice.
passionate ones, right? Like I remember because even when he became a coach, he was still making it into GSL, and he'd always have just these crazy cheesy builds. Because like I like that when there's a playing coach who's that passionate, I think they understand enough of the details to just see the game in a different light, and they're just so good at giving like free wins to their players and helping them guide them through series and stuff. So he was one of the much more passionate coaches out of there. I think there's been a lot of terrible StarCraft coaches who are just like not
Yeah,
even worth their space, but he was a good
like
one.
yeah, I remember having these discussions about coaching because when I think of like good coach, I think of him, and I think of Stork as well. Legendary Boudoir player that then would also be a coach that sometime would go deep into GSL.
Yeah.
And then you have like this League of Legends coaches discussion is like, can a coach be great even though he's silver? And I'm like, no, you can't. And no amount of mental gymnastic is ever gonna justify that to me. I don't
No. Well,
because a lot of people genuinely believe that they can have like grandmaster knowledge, but silver mechanics, and that's why they're still silver. And I do understand there can be a difference, right? But you still have to be somewhat decent at your game.
well, the
And then
thing is,
obviously
it's like
coaches, yeah. Okay, go
even
ahead.
even even masters level, there's like it's not that hard mechanically to get there if you have the game knowledge in any game. You don't need to be crazy fast. People are like, oh, but the mechanics, it's so huge. And it's like, unless you have some sort of hand injury or something like that, or some sort of limitation physically, like if you actually have grandmaster knowledge, being the equivalent of Masters 3 in any esport is fucking easy. Like it is really not that hard if you actually understand the details. So people have this view like, oh, why would you force them to grind? It's like forcing a football coach who's 60 years old to do sprints all day and learn how to dribble the ball and everything. It's like, no, it's not the same at all. It's using your hand on the keyboard and mouse. Yeah, it's an impressive thing. We like esports, but it's not that hard to at least be a decent level. Like I don't think you necessarily need to be grandmaster, but I think silver is so exceptionally low on the ladder where people don't know what most of the units do in silver. There's people in platinum who've never used a spellcaster. There's people in masters who've never used a spellcaster. I'm totally with you on that one, man. I've seen people talking about this recently, and it always gets me a little bit annoyed as well, because I think it's like, hey, let's justify like literally putting zero time into the game. And I think we've in StarCraft had plenty of commentators where it's been very obvious in past years, coaches, people who claim to be experts, reporters or whatever, and you could just tell they don't play the game. Because like their conception of what's happening in a game when they talk about it or commentate it or whatever, you're like, you don't even know what's happening on the screen, right? All those people are gone now in StarCraft 2, thankfully. But I remember in the
Yeah.
past, just like you'd read Twitter posts and they're like, oh, he's doing this wrong. And you're like, what the fuck are you talking about, man?
Yeah, like we have a scene mostly made of, like almost entirely made of really passionate people now. After 10 years, only the good ones are left. Feels pretty good, I think.
We've separated the wheat from the chaff, man. All the
No
craps.
more noobs.
Get those noobs out of here, man. You fucking noobs. It's like, that's something where I guess we even joke about it now, right? Where new people come in the community and like, it's like, oh, I'm a StarCraft player. Rather than saying, hey, how are you doing? I say, hey, what's your MMR? It's like, we're so elitist. We're like, where are you on the social ranking within our community? Like, well, I'm Masters and you're Diamond 1. So I get to tell you I'm right whenever we talk about anything. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe we're a little too elitist. I'm not sure.
And it's always funny too, because when I talk with some journalists and they're like, okay, so StarCraft, you've been playing for a while. I'm like, yeah, since I'm 17. My first LAN, I did my first LAN when I was 17. Like, oh, okay. But there's still new blood, right? Yeah, of course, there's Clem. All right, it's pretty young, right? You know my LAN, my first LAN ever? It was already there. Yeah, it was 10-year-old, just playing, being this tall, playing like, he wasn't sitting down, he was standing up while playing, and he was already here. And I'm like, even the young one, I've been playing longer than me, like somehow.
That's actually so funny, man. I that's the thing. Like, I remember when people, rock up and there's still every now and then I get a message like, "Hey, I want to go pro, blah blah blah," and I'm like, "Cool." Like, do you understand how long it takes to go pro? So, like, I tell people go do some research on the path to become a football pro or something like that. Like, if you enjoy kicking the ball around with your friends in the park, you can't after 1 year, no matter how hard you train, be a professional footballer getting paid a sick salary. Like, it's not going to happen. It takes years of building your muscles, building your muscle memory, building your understanding of how to work as a team and stuff. And it's the same in StarCraft, except I would say StarCraft is like the most unkind environment for learning, because it's literally the other guy is just constantly fucking up what you do. The meta changes. We've got balance patches in all esports these days that drastically change the playing field. So it's like, you need to actually be playing for a very long time. Like, I remember getting good in my region in early SC2, and then steadily the better I got, where I was like, I'm a pro gamer. All I did as I got better and better was realize how big of a difference there was in my understanding of the game between me and people who'd played Brood War and Warcraft 3 for many, many years. Those guys just had a better understanding of what RTS was, and there was so many fundamental lessons I'd never learned as a player.
Yeah, you see that you need a really good mindset. The example I like to use when people ask me like, "What's the fastest you've ever seen someone go from like beginner to pro?" And my answer is always the same. The fastest I've ever seen it was 1 year, when it was Lilbo. Lilbo rise from being complete shit at the game and being an extremely scary player that could beat anyone with like his all-ins. It was like lightning fast, but it was still like a year of a guy that had a way of looking at the game that was extremely impressive, and not that like only him had it. And he's still like, even in Overwatch right now, he still has this skill of like looking at a game and finding the bullshit that's gonna make him win.
Oh yeah, and he became an expert at that. So you say from kind of beginner from shit though. So are you saying like he was Masters League nobody, or are you saying
platinum? At the very beginning was platinum, got to master fairly fast, and then he went from like low GM to mid GM to high GM.
So he was platinum to high GM in 1 year.
So yeah. He wasn't like, maybe he wasn't pro. I don't exactly remember, but he was pretty fast, like really, really fast.
Even if he's high GM at that point, even if he's like not qualifying for Challenger yet or anything, or placing in big tournaments, that's insane. Like that's actually one of the fastest rises for sure.
Yeah, because I remember like, because when Lilbo was just like a random French name, and then eventually it was very fast. But I'm not, maybe it was faster at some point. Like obviously there's talented people everywhere, but you need to have played for a long time. Like no matter what, at some point when you actually want to win money, you can't rush it. You have to put in the work.
I still get a bit sad about how obviously the community has kind of got so upset with Lil Bao because he said something silly in an interview in a big moment.
I finally make my stand. I was actually, I think, the only one defending him.
I defended him as well. No, I defended him as well. I think because we both know him personally as well. So,
and I also know, I've only said this in French forums, so that's why like some of the French community was with him. But he had no choice. What he did was the only logical thing to do, and the only mistake he did was admitting to doing it, because the community will never understand. What you have to picture is, we are at the end of Heir to the Swarm. Everybody is playing Legacy. Absolutely.
So sorry, let's do a quick recap quickly, just for people who don't know. So we're talking about a player called Lil Bao, or Lil Bo is what most people called him. It was Lil Bao is what was meant to be said. A young Frenchman who got insanely good at StarCraft, and towards the end of Heart of the Swarm, he's a Protoss player. He basically just started smashing. He won WCS at the end of 2015 against Mana, I think it was, in the finals. He started dominating tournaments and stuff. The Blinkstalker King, and he made it to BlizzCon, and I believe he was the only foreigner And I don't think there was even a foreigner at BlizzCon for like, what, 2 years before that? Or something like that? Or there was maybe like, maybe there was like
Maybe
one
there
each
was
year.
Snoots one time. I don't exactly remember.
Essentially, this is the old system, so it was always just, it would be Korean dominated, and there would at most be one foreign player, and there was this whole foreigner versus Korean complex in the community, right, where everyone was like, oh, let's go for the foreigner, and they'd always lose and people would get upset, but at least they tried, and you'd still get a lot of fan support. So Lil Bao actually looked so good and so just unstoppable in a lot of times, and I think people really believed he could actually go far at BlizzCon. And then that BlizzCon coincided with the season ended, Legacy of the Void beta was open, and there was no foreign player in Europe or America who was in BlizzCon. Their entire Heart of the Swarm season was done. So they were all practicing the beta for the new game, and Lil Bo had literally nobody to practice with. And he admitted to this on stage after he got destroyed in a 0-3 series. Life cheesed him 3 times in a row. He got smashed. And in the interview afterwards, he said, well, I didn't really practice for this. And the whole community felt like it was a huge betrayal. He said there was no one to practice with. I couldn't play, good games. So I've just been preparing for Legacy of the Void because I knew I'd lose here anyway. And like, you've got this whole community who are like, yeah, we thought he could do it. And they felt super betrayed, and they all threw him under the bus. And there was memes for years about, oh yeah, he's just preparing for the next game and stuff. And it still gets brought up every now and then. And it was this really sad moment because everyone like got on the hate bandwagon really, really hard. Like they were brutal.
Like I don't really blame the community, because like the communication, the rhetoric that Lil Bo used was not good. It was not good. It should have been like, you either don't say anything, which would have been the best, or you do a long Twitter posts about how it was really hard for you to get practice. But for the actual story, because we were living together at that point in Poitiers with DNS, and we messaged every single KESPA team to see if we could travel to Korea to practice with them. Obviously, they told every single one of them told us to fuck off, except MVP. But MVP was like, we can invite you, but all of our players are playing Legacy of the Void. None of them are playing it for the Swarm, because we had no players in BlizzCon back then.
Yeah.
So I went to MVP because I wanted to practice Legacy of the Void, but Lil Bo was like, I mean, it was, I don't know, he still wanted to play a little bit of Heart of the Swarm, because he did practice a little bit. He played with Laser for a little bit, like practice some Immortals All In, but obviously, like, he played Legacy of the Void a lot, so it was kind of shit Heart of the Swarm.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so I remember some people were like, no, but Théo told you on Twitter he would have practiced with you. And
I was annoyed at Dario for that, man. Dario put that tweet out
like,
kind of afterwards. He was like, if you asked us, we all would have practiced with you. And it was not a nice tweet.
Like I also love Dario, but one, that's dishonest too.
Yeah.
Like Lil Bo could go like 80 wins in a row on 20, like obscene win percentage against Dario back then. And against a Dario that would not practice Heart of the Swarm, it would have been like, you would play 10 games, Lil Bo would win 9, and it'd be like, yeah, okay, sure, that's interesting. I mean, that's very old news, obviously.
But it was I think Dario was offended. A lot of people, even the pro players, were like, oh, well, like, we would have tried to help you more and practice more if you reached out to us. But you gotta realize you're a player. Your whole system of practices, you can grind the ladder any day, you can hit up customs, all of that's taken away. He couldn't even play ladder. It's not just he couldn't find customs. If he plays ladder, he's gonna play like Hitman over and over, or some guy who's like, I don't want to play Legacy of the Void. You're not gonna play against real pro gamers. So it was this really awkward time where we kind of realized like, oh, that's shit. And then you've got like Drogo just said, everybody in Korea was practicing Legacy except the BlizzCon players who were all practicing with each other. And then Lil Bao was like, cool, I'm off here on my own. Like, what can I do, man? And
I always wonder what would have happened if his first opponent was a Protoss. Because it was me, him, and DNS living in the same house. We could have cooked up some stuff, probably. But
Absolutely.
even then, even if we were like best friends, we still would have been like, yeah, Lil Bo, we love you, but we're not going to play Heart of the Swarm 24/7. We're still going to play a lot of Legacy of the Void.
I mean, it's so funny because it was all optics, right? It's apparently some people are saying it was actually a pre-match interview in chat, so maybe it was his pre-match interview. But either way, it's because he's a gamer nerd who spent his whole life as a young kid just playing games, and we were all way more awkward and way less good at presenting ourselves on camera the younger we were. He was like 18 at the time, I think, something like that. He was very young. And he literally was just like, "Oh, I just thought preparing for Legacy was more important." You know,
I think he was a bit older than 18, like
maybe a
19,
little.
20.
It's still pretty young,
I
man.
know
You're still a
it's
baby
yeah,
at that age. I was
yeah.
really dumb when I was there. Like,
True, true.
I'm like, I didn't know anything. And it's just because, you know, everyone didn't get the backstory. So you've got all these casual viewers, all this audience watching this moment. And he's like, yeah, I didn't even prepare for this match. And everyone just, it looked like disrespect at face value. And you kind of needed to know the backstory. So for anyone who actually knew it, we all kind of went, oh man, his only real mistake here was admitting it in the interview. So frankly, like if he was going to talk about it, he really needed to explain it better. But you know, he's not there. He's a pro gamer. He's not thinking about the way it's going to be perceived. And it's just one of those moments where you say something in a public forum outside of an actual conversation. It's a 2-minute interview and it gets taken way out of context and people just keep repeating it and echoing it. And I don't know, man. That was one of those disappointing ones because, I mean, back to the point, he was just an incredibly good player. He was so tight with his blink stalkers in basically every matchup, right? It was just the blink stalker goat, Lil Bao, and he was historically very, very good. Do you know how he's doing in Overwatch at the moment? Is he like playing contenders? Has he made it to a big team?
You can actually look him up. He's the coach of an Overwatch League team, Toronto Defiant. He's like, he used to be a strategic coach, but now the main coach went out, so now he's the temporary main coach for the team.
I just opened Wikipedia. It says he's actually now currently coaching Toronto Defiant.
Yeah, I mean, I said that, but very badly, French accent and all. So.
Oh, Toronto. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I thought you said turtle or something. I don't know. I totally misheard that.
Yeah, no, I just mumbled, and I assumed you would get Toronto Defiant.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay, cool. I've even actually Canadians even correct me because I'll always be like Toronto, and Canadians are like no, it's Toronto, and I'm like what? They're like
really?
yeah, you don't. They're like Toronto, and I'm like what? There's a T. And they're like
Yeah,
Toronto.
I mean,
I'm like okay, all right, guys.
Yeah, I'm not there yet in pronunciation. Like if you try to talk to me about how to pronounce the name of your city, I'd be like, I'm French. French. That would be it.
I don't know, man. Your English is pretty sick. Growing up in the gaming community, right? Do you ever do you ever get confused? Like, if you're speaking in French, do you just use all the English player unit names for like everything? If you're chatting to another French player, like DNS or whatever, or do you guys actually call them by the French names?
I remember it used to be a meme back then for like between the casters and the pros. If you wanted to be really funny, you would say the French name of a unit, and everybody would lose their shit because nobody uses the French name for any units in France. Not a single one of them. So if you would say, like, there was a challenge, there was to cast an entire game using only the French name, and like we would only know like half of them. So yeah, that's the answer to your question.
It's always good when like Smix or someone is translating the Koreans and they're like, shit, what's the unit name for this unit again? Like in Korean, because you know it's the same. Like they're used to think of the English names, right? I'm always like, oh man, that's got to be the biggest mind screw, right? Where like, or you say the name of a unit wrong or something, and then like the player's like, wait, what are we talking about now? I remember even just like learning the Korean unit names when I was in Korea, and I was like, oh, so this is. Then I was like, oh wait, that's just Zergling. But it's just with Korean pronunciations, juggling. And I'm like, oh, you guys just call it a Zergling just with a Korean. Okay, all right, that's cool. I'm like, so yeah, people would like, if they type it out phonetically, you just type juggling and you just try to say juggling. If you just say juggling, a Korean will think you're saying Zergling, basically. So you're like, yeah, juggling rush, you know? I'm like, oh, this is funny. Have you learnt any like Korean when you were over there? Did you just kind of nerd up in your hole and play video games? That's what I did. I didn't do anything in Korea except play games.
I've tried learning to read for a little bit because it's actually pretty easy to read, but I got too lazy. I can only say hello, goodbye, something like this unit is in balance. You just yell Sage very hard. And I know what to say over here because it's pronounced Yu-Gi-Oh, like the kids' card game.
Yeah, whenever you want service in the restaurant, Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I think it's technically like Chogyo or Yogyo or something, but yeah, you basically just say Yu-Gi-Oh. That's the same way.
Basically just Yu-Gi-Oh. It's time to duel. Bring me my food, please.
I think this is like the tasteless Korean lessons to people when they come. He's like, just shout Yu-Gi-Oh as if you're challenging someone to a card game, okay? And they'll come and serve you in the restaurant. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Oh.
Pretty much.
Awesome, man. So a couple of different topics I wanted to talk about today. I mean, this is
Let's
obviously
go.
pretty free flowing discussion, but while we've while I'm thinking about it, you're one of the most emotional players, right? You know, most recently
Yes.
you levitated a mouse and keyboard at Montreal, I think it was, where it managed to like hover in the air for a solid 2 seconds. You're known for
It did make the situation look a lot funnier than it was, so I appreciate the mouse for that.
Yep, some dirty builds from Massa or something. I can't quite remember which series it was.
It was a combination of Massa playing dirty and me playing like complete shit.
Well, that's usually the combo, right? Your opponent does
Yeah.
some weird shit, and then it's always the most angry stuff is the stuff that makes you fall apart. But back in the day, I think someone used to sit next to you in one of the Korean houses, and you know they'd say like they'd be in the middle of a game, and the table thump would always frighten them in the middle of a game if you'd lose a map. I'm pretty sure that was a story I
I
remember.
do regret that. I've been better over the years, but I used to like not calculate it at all. Like I would lose a game, I would punch a table, and would be business as usual.
Mm.
And when I was in Korea, eventually they told me it was not good. I actually do remember this. I used to be very tight with Lucira, actually. I really like we talked a lot about a lot of random stuff, and I just remember him coming up to me and was like, "Drogo, Drogo, no, not gentleman, not gentleman, stop." Okay, it wasn't gentleman, and yeah, like back, I just didn't think about that kind of thing, like because, and then eventually it was like, okay, this is actually annoying the shit out of everybody else, so just stop fucking doing that. And I've
Yeah.
gotten better. Now I think I only do it like when it's a really important thing.
Yeah. I mean,
And it's not even like it's not as with as much power. I don't know. It's hard, you know. It's not something that comes from. I know like psychologically where it comes from. I don't really want to share it, but I just always struggle a bit with that kind of thing. But it
yeah.
just it's a really fleeting moment. It lasts like 10 seconds. Then it just kind of goes away, and after like sometimes I'm back to normal 100%. And like in real life, I'm extremely chill.
Yeah.
Like that's
Well, that's the
like
funny
actually.
thing. People don't get to see you 99% of the time, but this is the thing you put all your effort into, right? And there are these moments, and you know, it's funny because like rage, anger is like very powerful. Emotion in general is passion, and it's powerful, and it's inextricably tied to ego and your sense of accomplishment and self-worth and all this
Yes,
sort of stuff.
exactly.
It's all
Like for
tangled up.
like yeah, like for like I realized that really early on, but like for better or for worse, a massive part of my self-worth is directly tied to StarCraft 2. And it is really rough when it's like that. Like you're actually like a victim to your thing. You can actually compensate for that. I mean, if, at least for me personally, if I don't practice too much for something,
Mm.
then if I lose it, then that's okay. But that's obviously not what you want to go for if you actually want to be a good StarCraft 2 player.
Yeah.
So it used to be very bad. Now it's a lot better these days. But obviously, I'm still like pretty angsty compared to like the entirety of the other StarCraft 2 pros that seem to always have it together, and I really admire like a lot of other people for that.
Well, it's impressive, isn't it? Whenever I watch Innovation play and there's just no reactions to anything that happens, and I go, part of me wants that, but also I think there's just different styles of play and player. I think a lot of people think they should try to be like Innovation and just show no emotion and have absolute mastery over everything. And like it'll come out as a your race is OP in chat and that's it, and like nothing else. And he doesn't, you can tell his heartbeat's not going up when he's playing, right? He's not like panicking and making mistakes, whereas I used to always get too excited and my heart rate would go up and I'd be like and start misclicking and stuff. I think a lot of the StarCraft community, especially the old school fans who've been following for over 10 years back in Brood War, it's like we really look up to this Korean ideal. And in the Korean cultural system, the way they've trained their pro gamers is a lot more have that strong control, have that mental discipline, don't express it, you know, learn to keep it in check, and you develop this control. But I think just as many foreign pro gamers have had success letting it out and having these bursts of emotion and anger and rage, but then using that as the fuel for the fire. Did you watch Parting versus TY the other night or morning for you?
No, I didn't watch it yet.
Okay. So that I just am thinking of because the first couple games went really rough for Parting, and he's just, you know, he's fidgeting in his chair. He's looking so pissed off. He's holding his face, and he actually fights back in that series. You can still tell he's not playing quite his own way, even though there's moments of brilliance. There's like lots of uncharacteristic mistakes, and he still makes the series quite close and good. But you look at TY, and even when he loses a map where he was ahead or whatever, it's just like almost no reaction, you know? So you've got like this yin and yang when you watch that match, which is so exciting. I couldn't wait. Every time they put the shot on the players, I was like looking at it, and you'd see Parting just this mess, and TY this like disciplined thing, and you could see like the slightest signs of worry on TY's face when Parting started to win maps and like push it back in his favor. It's like the tiniest thing, you know, because he's control versus chaos. So it's just this cool dynamic.
It's really funny because then it becomes a lot about, you know, the relationship between your normal state and when you get upset. I thought it was always very funny with Cyril, because, you know, Cyril is the guy that's always really cool and collected all the time. So when it's sort of going like a little bit irked when he loses in the middle of a series, you can tell like, okay, it doesn't seem like it, but he's really fucking pissed off right now. Like extremely. That little twitch, that was him fuming.
It was so good talking to him the other week, because, you know, there's just like little things he's like, yeah, if they gamble, they get really, really mad, you know? And I'm like, okay, yeah, like I figured as much.
Everybody gambles against Cyril. That's the thing. Like he plays like, you know, for everybody, StarCraft is a game where both players scout each other and react. For Cyril, StarCraft is a game where the other guy goes no scout into a dumb all in. Like his experience is completely different from House. It's very funny.
Well, that's it. I was laughing about that. I was like, oh, so you've been angry after every Zerg versus Zerg match you've played in the last 2 years then? And he's like, oh no, they're not normally that gambly. Like, so I could tell there's like specific gambles that trigger him more than others, where I'm like, so you do realize people are going 75 drones with 0 defense and scouting against you. Like, that is a gamble as well. I mean, I think he's fine with that gamble. He's like, that's fine, you know, I'll still beat you. But I like what you said, because you see the anger on his face, and I think of it the same where I think of him. I always think of Roger Federer in relation to Cyril, where I'm kind of like, oh, it's like another guy. People are like, oh, he's so cool and calm. Oh, have you guys ever seen Federer double fault? Like, come on, he looks like if you look into his eyes and you look closely, he looks like he's about to rip a child's head off or something. Like, he's so angry, but it's like this very calculated, controlled emotion. And then you've got like the more fiery, like I always compare it to tennis, because that's the 1v1 sport that I watch other than StarCraft, right? And then I see the players who are, you know, you're especially in the past, you're more of a John McEnroe, you know, you'll go smash your racket, you'll shout at the umpire, but then you'll feel better and you'll go back and you'll play the best StarCraft or tennis you've played, you know? It's like, it's for you've just got a different emotional valve.
It's just funny to bring tennis. There's a very funny clip in the French scene. I don't know the name of the French player, but it's just a clip of the guy, you know, losing in intense exchanges and just yelling at the top of his lung in French, "He's so fucking lucky! Fuck! He's so lucky!" Nobody understands what he's saying, but he's screaming at the top of his lung every time. And someone one day tagged me with that, "Hey, you got your tennis buddy over here." I just thought that's really cool.
That's amazing. I mean, I love it, because there are so many different ways of calculating it, and I used to always be in the school of like, oh, I've just got to not show any emotion and shut it down and stuff. But like, you've got to find your own dealing mechanism to harness your emotion and your passion and that sort of stuff. Like, people in chat are talking about how, hey, Cyril was actually shaking a little bit in his series versus Zest, where he got eliminated and he didn't look himself. And I think the point there is like, you have your own system, and if you go way outside of your own normal, you kind of mentioned before, right? So if you're normally super controlled, and then you start getting like too angry and like losing control of your emotions, it's really bad. But if you're someone who's used to just like venting and maybe have a bit of a rage and get angry and shout at yourself, and I think I've shouted at myself like in a booth before, and be like, you fucking idiot, let's fucking do this, come on. And like, you know, and it starts with like a bit of a self-tirade, telling myself I'm bad at the game, and it turns into like, let's fuck shit up, let's play better, let's do this, you know. It's maybe not the healthiest way of motivating myself, but I in the past have always been a very like shout at myself to motivate myself person. But I think it's if you're used to doing it one way and then you get thrown into like a different mode where you're like, oh, I'm too nervous on stage, so even though normally I'm the guy who lets it all out, today I'm going to just try to like hold it all in and shut it down, you're just not going to play as well, because you're trying to put yourself in an unnatural state of what you're used to.
Yeah, like for me it was mostly like, I'm a very much a guy that goes with the flow for everything, so self-discipline is something that sometimes I happen to lock myself into, but usually I just do my thing. And the main thing about, raging and smashing table and stuff is I really like gaming house environment. I really like them. But obviously that's not really compatible because it's really annoying for everybody around you. So that was the main drive for me to actually get better at that. It wasn't so much that, mate, if somehow it never was into gaming house, I'd be the guy punching my table after having losses. Then no problem. That would probably get me a good fan base. Just people waiting for it. Punch the table. Punch the table. But it was mostly about not bothering other people that I really wanted to stop with that kind of thing, because I felt very bad.
Yeah, especially in a team house, you're all packed in pretty tight like sardines. So
Yes.
you got to have a bit of respect. Definitely, I think it's been a learning process where people are like, okay, it's like if someone has hygiene issues or this or that, it's like, oh man, we're kind of, learnt in these more haphazard foreign houses, which we've both had the pleasure of living in a few different ones, and there's still some going in Korea and stuff. It's like, oh shit, it's not as organized, and it's like a new system, and it's like, oh crap, this is part team house, this is part a bunch of young people learning to live together and not get in each other's face. Like, can you stop leaving your skid mark underwear sitting on the back of my chair, please? Like, can you put it in the laundry where it belongs? Obviously we first met each other in 2014 in the MYI house in Switzerland. Stayed there for a few months. You were there as well. I'm trying to just remember back to those days. So I remember you were kind of just coming up. You were 18 at the time, I guess. 17.
I turned 18, I think, in Switzerland actually.
Yeah.
Because it was in November, so pretty much just fresh 18. Yep.
Oh yeah. Okay, so I think you turned 18 like just after I left. A little bit after that, because I left after Stockholm that year. So I was there for a few months with you. Obviously, it was an interesting environment. What did we have? We had Saxry there. We had Penguin up at 4 a.m. drinking Red Bull.
Jack G would always destroy me every game. And all of the MINCNT guys.
Stardust wasn't around at that point, I don't think. I think Stardust had gone off.
I don't think I ever was with Stardust, yes.
Yeah.
I would think I would remember it more clearly if it's the case.
But those were the early days of just grinding, and smashing it. Was StarCraft 2 the first like competitive game that you got into with that? Did you try any other esports before that? Like, what was the Drogo falling into SC2 esports story like?
Well, I mean, when I was a kid, there was like two types of game I played a lot of. It was like RPGs and strategy games. And pretty much like when I was in middle school, I saw a video of like, hey, this game is going to come out, StarCraft 2. It's like the StarCraft Brood War you played as a kid. I was like, oh, dope. I want to be a pro at that. And when I was in middle school, I always was like, yeah, after high school, I'll be a pro gamer. Thinking back on it, I think if I put my mind to starting to be a pro in high school, maybe I would have, reached the level I wanted faster. But after high school, I was like rank 50 GM, not a pro, especially back then, because a lot of, to be high GM, it was more about playing a lot of games than be good at the game. The MMR system wasn't here yet. So like rank GM was more like rank 100.
I was ranked 2 GM like the whole time I was in the MYI house, and there was no way I was number 2 in MMR. I just played a lot of games on one account.
Eventually, it was the same for me. It was like happy rank 1, and then 100 points below was me rank 2. But then it was like 10 players above, like maybe even 20 that were like just better than both of us, like really easily. It was quite silly, actually. I really like the MMR system. The point system was stupid.
Yeah, it makes me really sad because like I actually talk about this like every other week. Someone in chat goes, "What's the highest you've ever been in GM, Pig?" And I go, "Well, rank 1 on the EU ladder quite a lot of times, but it didn't actually mean rank 1." And I've got to explain that I actually don't know, and I'm like, maybe rank 20 GM, I don't know, and that would have been the personal best. I'm like, I don't actually know, not that high. We got a much better system now, but so you kind of just went into it. But what made you want to? You said I'll be a pro at that game. So had you actually watched esports before that moment? Like, because you said you saw a video that the game was coming out. Like...
I do remember that when I was 13 or 14, something like that, one New Year's was like, the New Year party. Instead of partying with friends or whatever, I just it was a slow year that one, so I didn't have any friends to party with. So I just sat at my parents' home and we were all partying with each other, like. And I spent entire nights playing Broadway against the computer and watching very old Broadway VOD of like
Yeah.
Pro League and stuff. And I have a very good memory of that night. Just watching this and I was like, yeah, that's pretty fucking cool. So I think when I watched the first trailer for StarCraft 2, I actually knew that the Broadway scene was a thing. Actually, I do think, or maybe it was like really close together, both of these things happening. I'm not quite sure.
Do you have like a special excitement when you'd watch those matches, or were you more just enamored with the idea of it would be sick to be really good and to be able to say I'm a pro gamer?
No,
What was the motivating factor?
When I was watching Broadway VOD, I was actually watching the matches. Like, it was actually for what they were. I was a big fan of this. Do you remember like a big metal music? Top 10 micro move of Slayer Boxer on YouTube.
Best YouTube
love these
videos out there.
so much. I love them so much. When you watch them again now, they're all so shit. Like, they're not good by any means. They're moves that are not exceptional. Like, it's like 2 medic on hold position, 1 fire bat, yeah, and then a bunch of Zerglings just derping on the fire bat without being able to kill it. So the fire bat kills 100 Zerglings. So you're like, what the fuck? It's so sick.
Well, it's so funny, right? Because there's a different time in StarCraft esports where it's like Boxer was basically all creative, unique plays, most of which only work if your opponent headbutts into it, right? Like it doesn't react, and it's like when you watch Golden or someone streaming now, and he's just trying to do like the silly, funny micro moves, you know, and it's like, or even like a dragon, and you watch their stream, you're like, oh, that's very cool. Like if you weren't smurfing 1,000 MMR below your normal MMR, would you be able to do that dragon? Like, you know, it's kind of the same thing back then. I remember there's one where he's got the barracks, he floats in behind the mineral line, builds a marine. And then the Dragoon tries to come around to get the Marine, so he lifts the barracks, and the Marine runs to the other side, and the barracks lands, like drops the Dragoon, and the Dragoon's just like bugging out. And each time the Dragoon micros to the other side of the mineral line, he lifts the barracks and runs the Marine and lands it. And it's like it's cool, creative things which people didn't know you could do in the game back then. And that stuff was like brain breaking when we watched those videos back in the day.
Yeah, but to answer the original question, more than the top 10 micro moves, I just had a really strong belief. And I still do now when I stop StarCraft for a bit and I watch. It's a little bit like the kid in me, you know? The one that enjoyed Dragon Ball Z, enjoyed the epic adventures of people fighting against unbeatable odds. Just being a StarCraft 2 pro just felt like the coolest thing in the world in general. And the cool factor is the thing that I think never left me, and the thing that always kind of brings me back to StarCraft 2. When the game, you know, becomes too much about, I hate this race, or this is too frustrating, and you just step back and then you look back on it and you just watch a game on a random stream and like, hey, that's really cool. That's really cool, actually. I feel like a shonen protagonist or that kind of thing. So that's why I wanted to be a pro, I think, mainly for the cool factor.
You're literally controlling a sci-fi army, microing things like in all these different areas, expanding across the map, making cool plays. I mean, that's it, right? It is literally the ultimate gamer fantasy, I think, for most of us who love StarCraft. It's like, dude, you're literally controlling this fucking army at this peak level. You're invading the map in different areas. You're making cool, smart plays. I think that's probably the best motivating reason I've ever heard. It's like, it's really cool to be a StarCraft pro gamer. I don't think you can actually put it more simply than that, man. It's that's cool. So you kind of started practicing a lot. Obviously, you were just kind of like, all right, I'm just going to grind hard and get into it. And then you joined MYI and stuff. I mean, was there a turning point in your early tournaments? Do you remember where you felt like, oh, you were like, come on, notice me? Was there like an early online cup or a local tournament LAN that you won where you felt like you started to get noticed?
It's actually pretty funny. In 2015, it was actually pretty famous back then. I qualified almost immediately for WCS, like 2 months after it. Like I went into the house, Lilbo sat next to me, I copied every single build, and then I went into the WCS qualifier, played that pure Zerg brackets, and qualified. And it was like, I think I beat like top players back then. I think I beat I beat Snoot for sure, Targo, Nerchio, and then my memory is a bit slim. I don't remember if it was Firecake or a young Cyril. I think it was Firecake. It was like Firecake, Targo, Nerchio, Snoot. For a guy that was a complete no-name, it was pretty good.
Dude, yeah, I'm pretty sure that was when I was in the house, right? Because I feel like I remember you getting really pumped up and excited, but maybe it was the previous season or the season after that. I can't even remember, but that's yeah, I remember you rose up
I did a
very
video of
quickly.
it on the web, was just penguin filming it from behind.
I was
So
thinking
that was
that,
very,
yeah, that
yeah,
was it.
so that was very, very nice. Obviously, I got completely destroyed by Benny in the first match. We had the challenger match, then the premier match, and I was playing against Benny because I had a very poor seeding, and Benny was insane back then. So he just rolled over me really easily. And then just to do the very short version, I played a lot of cups. I then failed to qualify for the next WCS, but I felt okay about it because I was like, if I played very good, I could qualify, but then it would be okay. Then I didn't qualify for the next one, and that one was very unlucky. I was more than good enough to be in the WCS, and that was very, very upsetting.
Mm.
And just for the very short version, then a few months later, I finished second at the Asus Rogue in probably the tournament where I'm the most proud of my life in terms of actual level compared to the feel of the competition.
And
I
was
was
that
very good at the
it
tournament.
was 2015?
It was 2015. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I
I
mean
lost
that's
to Lotira in the final, and before that, I won against everybody. It was great.
dude. I totally forgot about that tournament. Actually, yeah, that was a very quick rise to prominence. And that was kind of yeah bloody quick actually compared to a lot of other players. So I mean that tournament you're still very proud of. Can you remember what it was like? Was it the fact that you just felt like you played your game and you were just grooving the whole tournament?
Yeah, it was. At first, I got extremely lucky because in the group stage, I should have lost in group stage one because it was back then. Colossus versus Colossus. I mean, PvP was all about Colossus versus Colossus, and it was 1-1 against Stardust. And then in the last game, he literally has more Colossus than me. And I move into him, and I win the fight extremely convincingly. And I'm just like, okay, whatever, I'll take it, dude. So I barely make it out to the first group stage because I think I lost the first series against Stardust. And then the second group stage, every single new build that I just learned in PvT work just like a charm against Keen. Then I think I won against your Thermal, and same
Mhm.
thing, they work just like a charm. Then I 2-0 a random Korean guy that was called Apocalypse, that wasn't too good. And then I 3-0 Yun.
Oh, Apocalypse! I forgot about him. Holy shit.
Yeah, he was like a TVT specialist, so like he won against Bunny, but then in PvT he wasn't very good. So I come into a tournament when I'm like, I just keep winning this series extremely convincingly, playing really high level. Or then against Losira, I didn't listen to my coach, and I was a bit too stressed out. Thinking back on these old tournaments, like the first good results, it's actually very funny how stressed I was in the final, and like how much lower my level was compared to the one I was playing, even though I was playing pretty good already. The stress playing in high level does diminish. I don't think it completely goes away. Like you always play worse at tournaments, but
Yeah.
in my first few tournaments, it's actually really silly how much worse I was playing. I
Well, that's
remember like just being complete shit.
yeah, dude. I mean, it's crazy because I mean, even the other week I was rewatching like Cyril Neeb from his first big finals, and you just see Cyril just kind of like lose each game, just like playing a bit worse than normal. And like I feel like everybody has this experience where there's always like it's a new moment you've made it to, which you've dreamed of for long enough, and you kind of know you can do it, but you're not mentally prepared. And the first time up there, it's like there's so much racing through your head. Can you remember like hands shaking, getting sweaty palms, talking to yourself? Like can you remember what the experience was like? Just to describe it for anyone who's never going to get that experience of being in a finals on a stage.
It's funny. The first memory that popped into my mind was actually a fairly recent one. When I was playing my challenger match against Showtime to have the paid trip to a tournament directly into Group Stage 3, and I was down 2 against Showtime, but eventually I won 3-2. And in that last game, I remember thinking, if this game goes on for another 2 minutes, I'm 100% gonna lose because I'm way too shaky right now, and I'm never winning any macro game. I've lost
Mm,
complete control. So immediately I moved him, and I won. I was like, if I didn't win with that, even if I was ahead, I would have lost the game because sometimes you just lose control, like your internal clock about what to do just kind of goes haywire. Sometimes there's this thing where in practice, 9 games out of 10 went great, but you're thinking about that one game lost where the time kind of aligned against your favor, and
mm,
suddenly in your tournament game, you're playing to not lose at one game,
yes.
which is how you're always going to lose. like the most common pattern is trying to not lose that 1 out of 10 games will make you lose your tournament game almost every time.
That's actually insane. Yeah, you kind of it's such a balancing act, isn't it? Right? Because I mean, you want to be aware of that 1 out of 10. You want to try and scout for it. You want to be mentally prepared to do the reaction if you realize that situation's happening, and at the same time, you don't want it occupying any of your mental space until you scout that situation, right? So there's like this weird thing which I always struggle with as a player, where it's like I want to review what I think are the likely hard situations I'll encounter in my head and what I'm going to do in each one of those situations. And I want to do that right before the match. But then I also want to try and empty my brain and forget it all. And I want to put it out of my RAM into my hard drive, right? I want it to be like in the deeper memory. Because if it's in my RAM and I start thinking about that when I need to just be focused on actually reacting to what happens in the game and doing the normal 9 out of 10 things that you need to do really fucking well, I'm going to fuck up. Like you said, you're focusing on that one thing and you're like, oh, you're looking for that Hellion drop. You're not even in a game where there's a Hellion drop coming and suddenly you get supply blocked on 46 and you're like, that's never happened in my last 45 PVTs. How am I supply blocked on 46? And like, you kind of start feeling like you're watching yourself playing and start freaking out a little bit, man.
Yeah, watching yourself play is always the worst feeling in the world. Honestly, it hasn't happened in a long time, so I'm quite happy about that.
That's
When it does,
yeah. You're like,
gone.
what am I doing? What am I doing? Right? It's almost like you've got your separate thought consciousness from your hands are just doing things. And I always thought the most jolting was if you lose track of this time, where something happens and you can't understand how it is there at that moment in the game, and you realize your entire sense of like the game timer and the balance of where both of you are in the match is just off. And I would always find that to be super tilting, because I'd be like, wait, is everything else off as well? Is it just that one thing? And I'd get really thrown.
You know what's funny, actually? And I know we're talking about a long time ago, but I mentioned a match they literally played yesterday. I lost against Clem in Underdogs 3-2. And in the last game, I was playing pretty well, but I went for a proxy Robo Twilight Dark Shrine. These 3 buildings were proxied, and eventually I could not use them. And in the middle of the game, it went into a big macro game. I was like, wait, this opening is very unusual. What am I supposed to build again? And I literally went through the list of every single Protoss building in the game. I'd be like, right, I need to rebuild a Twilight. Right, I need to rebuild a Robo on a Robo Bay. Yes, I have the Robo Bay at home, but my Robo is proxy. Need to rebuild a Robo. Okay, how many gates do I have? And I literally start counting them in my main.
Oh, no.
Like going in slow-mo, because it was so unusual. What happened?
Well, this is exactly... And we're back with the Pig Show. We just had a quick drop of the stream there. Drogo was in the middle of describing a match. So apologies for the interruption there. Bit of a cutting Drogo off mid-sentence. And now we're resuming. You were just telling me about a match you played literally yesterday against Clement Underdogs.
Yeah, so we're talking about how we lost control in a match because of stress, right? That wasn't exactly the case, but I thought what you were describing was pretty close, where I proxied a Robo, a Twilight, and a Dark Shrine. So all of that proxied, highly unusual. And when I eventually got it found, and then I lost it, I had to mentally at some point in my game be like, wait, what do I have in my main base right now? I need what? Wait, Robo, no, not Gate, not a Forge, not Cyber Core, right? A Twilight, yeah. I had to mentally slowly go through the list of Protoss building. I thought that was pretty funny. Like, that doesn't usually happen, but sometimes.
It's a weird one.
Sometimes stuff happens.
Do you think that's like you just had never really been in that exact follow-up situation? Or was it just you've been there but just not as many times and you add the pressure of a tournament game to it?
No. Well, it's I actually know why. Because usually when you go for the 1-base DT, the follow-up is almost always a 2-base charge at timing. It's just very strong or whatever. But because of the flow of the game, I had to just go into a macro game, which I maybe had done like twice before.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was the thing of like usually in StarCraft 2, everything you see in the tournament is being practiced hundreds of times. This time it had been practiced twice, so I added my Robo a little bit late. Like I had a Robo Bay down, and I'm like, I need something else to make a Colossus. Right, a Robo.
That one that's
Yes.
depowered in the corner of the map. Like we don't want to be rallying Colossus from the corner of the map to our base,
Yeah,
man.
really.
Two medevacs are flying over. They just see a Colossus just walking, and they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna drop Marauders on that, buddy." Like, oh, that's so funny because it's the same thing that causes players to build a second DT shrine, right? You proxy a DT shrine, you forget you have one, and you're like, "Hey, it's late mid game. It's time to add my DT shrine when I'm adding my fourth base." And you're like, "You know, you already have one, right?" Like, you know, it's
There's also the Terran equivalent where they go for like a speed mine drop, so they make an armory in the corner of the map, and then you see them rebuilding an armory in their main base.
I've done that too many times, man. Oh, you always feel so silly. You're like, I already had that. God damn it. The third engineering bay sometimes as well happens or something
that
like
one's
that.
a classic as well.
It's funny, yeah. Like those are kind of understandable ones, right? You freeze up, you go, oh shit, what am I meant to do? But it's due to lack of practice, right? Where so much of what you do as a player is you know, people think it's like every little thing you're thinking about. So much is muscle memory and training and pre-planned strategies. And people say, oh, so StarCraft's just about clicking then. And it's like, no. There's a crazy amount of decision making and intelligence in terms of which reactions you pick, which muscle memory you go with, how you understand what your opponent's goals are and adjust your strategy to that situation. So I think there's actually there's so much to all of that, but I think also where I get annoyed at myself in a situation like that, I'm not super upset. I would go, that's a rare situation. Okay, I should have probably had a bit of a more mapped out plan or a few more games practice with that follow up in case it went to that situation. But it's kind of hard to prepare for that ahead of time, to be like, you know, with this build, it almost always goes this way. I should actually make sure I practice if I don't do the 2-base all in with the Zealots afterwards and make sure I have that mapped out. There's so many branches in StarCraft. Like, you just can't always have every single option prepared for, right?
Yeah, and even if you try to, then it's actually a skill. I think that some StarCraft 2 players are better than others. The one obvious answer to that is like, well, who is a StarCraft 2 pro that has a lot of experiences in like a wide variety of situation? And to me, that answer would be SOS, the man we call the man with 1,000 build, where it would just like, you felt like you would do something weird and be like, okay, surely you do something weird, but surely you're not prepared to like every single weird branches that are new to most people. And he's like, oh, I am, actually. I very much am. It's like, well, that's scary as shit. Because SOS, when you watch him play, you're like, well, he's kind of slow. And he almost looks like he struggles to play. But then you're like, things always line up for him. Why is he always so lucky? For really long, I really struggled to understand how did SOS get so lucky. And then when I went to Korea, like really recently, I was like, okay, he is 6k6 in Korea right now, MMR. Surely I can get close to that. Nope, not even close. Absolutely not. And I got a lot of respect for SOS when I was like, yeah, well, okay, you're going Colossus drop now. Like, I think I see why it works. You have 2 units against Terran. You're moving out on the map. You found the Hellion in the middle of the map. I tried that. It just goes around, kills over my probes. I lose 40 points. I'm like, yeah, fuck my life. Okay.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's like they've learnt so far down, you know, I often call it the rabbit warren, right? Where it's like this tunnel with all these little tunnels branching off it, and you go so deep, and no one's been below the 3rd layer. And then there's an SOS or a Bly, and they're like, oh, no. My advantage in the strategy game is I know every corner, and I might be a bit slower, a bit worse at micro than you, might be get supply blocked a little bit more, but I'm going to take you to a place where you're fumbling through the dark and you're really unsure of what you should be doing. And I am so aware of all the cheeky bullshit I can do to just destroy you at that point in the game. And I mean, we think of PvT as one of the most mechanically demanding matchups to defend everything Terran can do to you. And you watch Haas play, and the man has the mechanics of a sloth. He's so slow, and he's so, you know, he's up 70 supply versus Maru, like, every game he plays against him. It's like, how?
Yeah, to be fair to Haas, he actually has very good micro. In the situation he puts himself in all the time. Because the reason I say that is I remember playing Haas in tournaments, right? And I think I mostly always won against Haas. But you know the first 2 adepts in PvP? this man is the most try-hard son of a bitch I have ever seen with the first red adept. It's actually mind-boggling. Usually what you can do is, he has the first shade, you wall, and then you move a bit with your stalker forward, then you poke a bit the adept. It's like, oh, I lost some HP, I have to go home now. He's always like shooting in, going back, looking, okay, not shooting in again, and you always have to, you are at the edge always of being able to damage the adept, but you never quite can, so you have to go back every time. It's very, very annoying. Extremely annoying.
Well, I mean,
I was very frustrated.
he focuses so hard on those units, right? And he gets really good at it. So, like, that's the thing is, like, he just says, no. Like, a lot of my strategy is going to be based around this. Like, how did he beat Showtime in that game 5 at that WCS tournament in Valencia? Well, guess what? His 2 adepts got in and killed 12 probes. You know, it's like, but he does it more consistently than other players because he's always trying for it. In the early days of the shield battery, he would just 12 pile on 13 gate, double gate, and just chrono adepts across the map. And he'd just build shield batteries outside the Zerg space, and he'd just kill them with adepts rallying off 2 gates and shield batteries outside their natural. And it was like, for like 2 months, that's all he did every ZVP on the Korean ladder. And he was insanely high, and he kept killing Zergs. Like, people couldn't defend it with Hatch first until they really, really had played against it a bunch of times. It's just so funny because it's like, no. He does get expert at that stuff. But in a game where your way of getting ahead because your opponent's so turtle up is like, oh, just macro and take 4 bases and go double upgrades and get splash. And you'll see Haas kind of like maybe be building probes 60% of the time, like not constantly, hits a supply block, he's not growing his upgrades, and then he'll take the worst fight of all time and kind of, you know, it's so weird how people can have such kind of tilted skill sets in StarCraft. But I think it's also what makes the game so interesting because it shows that there is such a range of things you can focus on and be good at and still be a bloody good competitor. It's also why I think if StarCraft was bigger and we had 4 full-time coaches for Drogo, you'd have one who's just coming up with like the sickest cheese builds for you. You'd have one who's working with you on your mental game and your focus, one with your build preparation in terms of how you play out a series. And you've got one guy who just like studies your opponent's habits. I feel like StarCraft is at a great level right now. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not, but it's like something where if there was a crazy amount of money in it, I think there would be just so much room for coaching like teams working together to just make play ridiculously abusive. I'm not sure if that would make the games more entertaining, but I think there could be a lot of room for improvement in that regard.
You know, I always like to illustrate this concept in my head, and this is going to be a little bit of my weeb moments. But imagine if StarCraft 2 was much, much, much bigger. Mm-hmm. So much so that you could make a sports anime style, like, story out of it. You know, like in an anime about basketball, for example. You're like, okay, well, they're always really, really badass, like almost superhero. It's like, this guy never misses, no matter where he is on the court. And he just shoots, and then it's like, oh my god. And it's like, this guy is lightning fast. Oh my god, he's fast. This guy, you can't see him, he's invisible. And it's very cool, right? But eventually, you run out of crazy concepts. You know, it's a ball. There's only so much stuff you can do that's gonna be crazy. So, but it's not totally true. There's a lot of stuff you can do to make a good story. But the point is, if you were to do a sports like manga or anime with StarCraft 2, this guy can do this cheese that's very good on this map because of this unit. You would have an infinite amount of concept of like one particular bullshit that someone can do to like beat another guy. You would never run out of anything of weird concept where like sports like sometimes struggle to come up with new wacky things to do like 10 chapters in. I really wish there was a StarCraft 2 anime, as you might be able to tell.
That would be so sick. There's a huge range of strategies. I mean, it's why you get such one-sided games sometimes. It's like I'm a pretty I would say a strong casual MMA fan recently, and I like watching it as well. And a lot of people get really disappointed when they watch it because it's like, oh, but that guy just knocked that guy out in 20 seconds. And it's like the same thing when you watch someone just 2 racks and kill someone in StarCraft, and they're like, well, that guy just destroyed that other guy. I'm like, that's kind of what makes it so exciting, right? Is like there is so much you can do to outsmart and defeat your opponent in different areas of the game. You don't have to fight them on their terms, right? So that can sometimes lead to more inconsistency and that sort of stuff. But it just, when someone can set themselves head and shoulders above the competition and just keep winning when everyone's already like preparing for them, it makes it so legendary because it's like, oh my God, everyone's studying that guy. They're trying to like break him down and find a way to expose his weaknesses. And it's incredibly hard to stay at the top or even anywhere near the top, right? So there's a lot of like natural ups and downs in any player's career. And I think there's also a process of reinventing yourself so you can't be prepared for as easily. Have you ever had a moment where you were like, oh, people are just doing this to take advantage of me, and you needed to learn a new skill, a new mechanical
Well,
thing, or a new type of strategies?
the easiest way to do it, and you could ask any pro, and they all have some variation of this concept, is you pretty much always have one thing that you do that you like to do, and then another thing that beats the thing that people will do to beat the first thing.
Mm,
And usually, at the most basic, it's just two things, right? You have rock and scissor.
yeah.
That's pretty. You can't have all three. That's not how it works. But you have pretty much two things. One that you like more than the other. But if you think that the guy will try to counter you, you do the other thing. Obviously, you can branch out many more ways with this. But at the basis of it is pretty much that. And if you don't have that, which sometimes happens, because sometimes the counter to what you like to do is something that to be countered. Okay, I'm losing my track of thoughts. But sometimes having a good game plan and good builds will force you to play strategies that you're not comfortable with, and sometimes it's very difficult to balance all of this. This is also something why the rise of Cyril was very cool, because for so long the way someone would be at the top was they would be very good at some situation, and they would just play games forcing the situation, but because they were so good, attempts to counter them would not be sufficient, and they would just keep winning. But eventually, if you're winning because of strategy or because you're really comfortable with a certain situation, you're gonna get countered. Like, it is gonna happen. With Cyril,
Yeah.
it was never really the case. Or like you could say, the only thing you could say when you counter him is like, okay, Cyril is really good at late game. It's like, great, just go counter him now with that knowledge. Like, doesn't really help. It was just like the first guy that was really dominant at StarCraft because of like raw mechanic and speed, which people said happened before, but it wasn't actually true. Like when Innovation was winning against everybody in Korea with just rallying units across the map, wow, his mechanics are really cool. Yeah, sure, but he's still comfortable with like a really defined situation when you think about it.
Yeah.
And it's just because there's not many counter to it. It's still a situation. You take him out of this, and he's not gonna be as dominant. He's still gonna be very good, but he's not gonna like dominate everything.
Okay, I think Maru had the same storyline, where I think Maru echoed Cyril's same storyline in Korea, where you had a guy who would fall behind. Yes, he often forced these cheesy, messy scenarios, but what was so impressive is similar to Cyril, he could come back from almost any situation, right? Where Maru would end up behind and would be able to just find his way back into games. There were games where he was down 70 supply versus Su, and he played the most like really pristine late game. You know, you had this whole package sort of player, and it defines itself a bit differently to the way Zerg plays with Cyril, but I felt like it was the same thing where it was like, oh shit, this guy's like got the cheesy game, but he's also just so good in the long macro game. He's very good at scouting and responding, and just kind of, I feel like that year of 2018, you had these two players who both just were kind of like, hey, we are faster, better at microing, we're more consistent with all the fundamentals of the game. And like you said, right, it was like, hey, wait a second. In the past, it was, no, like to stay at the top, you need to like mix in enough like cheese or like force your situation. You need to become like parting in 2012, be the best at this Immortal Sentry push and do it over and over and over again, and nobody can stop it, right? But with Cyril, he had way more range than that.
Yeah, and that's obviously, and I really don't want to take away from anything. The fact that he was playing Zerg, because Zerg is inherently like that, was because he was the best at this. He was the most rewarded. The reason why I bring this up is I do agree that in 2018, Maru and Cyril look unstoppable. But what I just brought up, like, if someone knows how you like to win games, they're always gonna use it against you. That's completely what happened to Maru in 2018, when he got smashed by SOS in a very sad series, actually. Why SOS was just like, I know how you want to win all of these games, and I'm just gonna be here for you. You're gonna be better at me at like 1,000 things, but I know how you want to win, and you don't know how I want to win. So then I have a huge advantage.
Yeah, it was kind of sad, wasn't it? It was like, oh
It was
really?
very sad. I
You're
was
just
very
gonna
sad actually.
play into his hands? Like you're gonna just fly that Widowmine drop into the Blink Stalkers on one base? Like, okay, okay, well it's fine because, surely you'll do. I do think I maybe I'm being kind to Maru. I do think he played more flexibly and better the rest of the year. I do think he played like pretty bad at that tournament in terms of his flexibility. As much as it was outside of his wheelhouse, it was like he literally forgot his second depot in the third game. I was like, what are
The
you
depot,
doing?
yeah,
Like
that's
that.
right. I forgot about the depot. Yeah, the depot.
The second
blunder.
depot. Anyone can forget the 44, the 46 supply block, the 36 overlord for a few seconds. The second supply depot, that mistake does not happen at BlizzCon. That was Maru falling apart on a big stage, which is just so weird. I guess it's because he's been in the GSL studio 1,000 times. He can be there in a finals and not give a fuck, but he comes to BlizzCon and suddenly he falls apart.
Yeah, it's a little bit like if you see a guy at a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament just forgetting to draw the first card at the beginning of the turn. It's like, you don't forget that because obviously it's the thing you always do. I don't know. It was terrible.
You can't make that mistake, man. That's crazy.
Why do I have no cards?
Oh, sorry. I forgot to build SCVs for the first 3 minutes of the game. Sorry. Can we restart? Like, no, we can't. Like, that's your job to remember that thing, man. That's actually the thing you gotta pay attention to that, buddy. Okay, so something I wanted to just touch on quickly. So I remember a few years back, you finally started using rapid fire warp-ins, and you were like, oh, I thought this was a gimmick. I can't believe I wasn't using this before. This is the best thing ever. Can you just tell us, like, because I find it funny whenever people use antiquated like mechanics just because they're stuck in their ways as a pro gamer. What was it that made you start using the rapid fire warp-ins? And just for the audience, sorry, I guess I should preface this. That's you bind it so that there's a thing in the hotkey settings. Obviously, you guys can Google rapid fire if you want the info on it. If you want to warp in zealots, for instance, you can just select your warp gates, hold down the Z or the Z key, and just go wave your mouse. You don't even need to click, and it'll warp them in. And you can warp in 20 zealots in like half a second. So what was it that made you kind of swap over to that? And are there any other mechanical changes that have really helped evolve your play in the last 5 years?
I need to think about it a bit, because I do remember that at the beginning, the only thing I had rapid fire was zealots. It's the only thing I had rapid fire for. Everything else I would click. Because for very long, in Enter the Swamp, a lot of really good Protoss player would still just click very fast. That was just kind of thing. You would just click when you warp, just what you do. And to be honest, I feel like the most useful rapid fire was for Zerg players. When the new wave of Zerg just all started having rapid fire, it really elevated the speed of games in general. So we had to play catch up rather than like trying to innovate. I'm not quite sure when I went rapid fire, but obviously you very quickly realize that you can never go back.
Yeah.
That is just an absolute given. And in terms of like mechanical thing I could never go back on,
Did you ever change your mouse speed? DPI?
It's actually very funny when I tell people, when I won DreamHack, I was playing on black switches with mouse acceleration. So I had like the...
Sorry, I need to cancel the show, Drogo. I gotta fucking leave after that disgusting revelation. Oh my lord. I used black switches for a year because that was the only mechanical keyboard my sponsor had given me at the time. Okay, so black switches are so bad for StarCraft because the whole point is they are really easy to hold down for FPS games when you're holding down W to fucking run forwards and like they just stick down. StarCraft is all about double tapping your control groups to zoom to them and stuff. And it literally is really slow to double tap on a black switch keyboard. It is the worst for StarCraft.
You have to press very hard. Your finger become very strong.
They call him Thick Finger Drogo.
When the A moves, the Earth quakes.
That's it. You were training to levitate the keyboard back then, man. You're like, these fingers will be so strong. Bam! It's like, yeah, man. You hit the middle of the song, the crescendo, and you're like, smash your keyboard. And I'm like, okay.
I think if I just quickly go back to everything, I think everybody, when they just learn to play with camera hotkeys, just all be like, oh, what the fuck? Like, camera hotkeys are really, really great.
When did you
It
learn
was
those?
also a long time ago. I think I wasn't even Grandmaster, but I was like, I need to
Okay.
use thing. My one hipster thing is that I have a camera hotkey for where my pylon used to be.
Mm.
Because before Porters was all about whopping in at the proxy pylon.
Yeah.
These days it's not as relevant, but it's still fairly useful really often. Like that hotkey is just for the beginning of the game. It's like,
Yeah.
why are you doing a camera hotkey for your wall? And I'm like, then that way I don't have to scroll to my wall to build something. It's like, is that really useful? I'm like, I can't live without this. If you take this away from me, I will quit StarCraft 2.
Well, that's
You way
that's
too used
yeah.
to it.
No, that's a huge one. That makes perfect sense. For a Terran, it should be on their depot, the lowered depot in the wall that their rally point set to. That's the same thing. So I call that the rally point camera location. I will put that on my proxy if I've got a proxy robo or a proxy warp
Exactly.
in point. But if you're playing a more defensive game, it's your wall in and it's where your units are rallied. And that's really useful in a base trade as well. Because then you set your rally points back inside your main and you reset your rally point there. So you can bounce between your army and your rally point very easily. Like, it's just one of those things. I really enjoy that same camera location. I think that's huge. So you mentioned mouse acceleration. Was it soon after DreamHack you turned that piece of shit off? Or
No, it was fairly recently actually. Like
oh,
maybe
really? Okay.
I think it was 2 years or 1 year ago. Maybe
Mm.
more like 2 years, I think. Probably 2 years ago. I've played with max acceleration for a very, really long time.
I think Uthermal's still using it. I think he's just like one of the last StarCraft pro gamers to still use mouse acceleration just because he's used to it.
I know Denver used it at some
Mhm.
point. I don't know if he still does.
So for anyone who doesn't
But
know, mouse acceleration is a setting that's on by default in Windows because Microsoft want people to have less accurate mouses and hopefully develop RSI by having just shitty mouse control. It's a terrible setting that's on by default in Windows. I don't know about Mac and stuff and other systems, but if you go into your mouse options, it's called Enhance Pointer Precision, which is the biggest meme in the world because it does the opposite. It literally means as you move the mouse, it speeds up and starts actually skipping pixels on the screen, and it is incredibly bad for your consistency with your mouse movement, so it makes it harder to develop muscle memory. When I turned that off and also drastically lowered my DPI in 2015, late 2014, somewhere around then, it was around the time I redid all my mechanics. Yeah, I found I used to misclick a lot. So I could control my hand and do big jumps of my mouse speed and do lots. I could, like, there was occasionally I'd hit it just right and I could do some crazy splits and stuff. But 1 in 3 times I'd misclick 2 of those and I'd completely fuck it up and I'd have to redo the actions. And anytime you got to redo actions consistently in StarCraft, you're much better off having things happen reliably because that fucks your rhythm. It makes it really hard to multitask. If you have to keep re-giving orders because you keep misclicking them, it's a massive time waste. And there's always a couple of outlying pro gamers in every game that still use it. And it's just a testament to how amazing humans are. Like, honestly, it's humans can play and you can find a way to be accurate with it. Like, humans can, do amazing things with all sorts of handicaps that are put upon them, all sorts of situations. We will always find a way. So don't get me wrong. I don't think there's actually, it's going to ruin you as a player. And most gamers and players play with this by default if they're not pro gamers because they just don't know. It was what they always had on by default. But yeah, basically there's a few CS players who use it, but most CS players who are basically our gods of mouse accuracy will say, turn that shit off, it is bad. And lower DPI is usually generally better. What DPI do you use?
800. Just
800.
very standard. I can literally boot up any PC. It's gonna be the default thing, so that's convenient.
Yeah. Same for me.
It's fun.
Same for most players.
Talking about mechanical stuff, because I was pretty like. Now that you mention it, there was a thing that I've tried to change about my gameplay that I did not manage to do, and I've known other people managed to do that. It's when you move the camera around in StarCraft, you drag your mouse to the edge of the screen, and then the screen moves.
Yes.
And you know where I'm going with this. Some people use the middle mouse button.
Yeah.
Some people like Cyril. And when I learned that's how Cyril moved his camera, and I was like, shit, that's probably why, he always seems to view more of the battlefield. Because the theory is, if you don't have to do this big movement to the edge of the screen to look where you want, and just press the button and move exactly where you want the screen to be, you see more useful information on average during the entire game. And I was like, well, that sounds dope. And I really try hard to learn that. And I tried really hard for a week. I could have tried harder, to be honest, but when I started losing co-op games because of that, I was like, maybe that's gonna be for another lifetime. So now the only thing that's great for me is that I've sufficiently practiced it. When I play League of Legends or Dota, I move the camera of the middle mouse button. So I'm like, great. So I've learned something at the very least, but in StarCraft for me it's impossible. I cannot visualize how we do it. I know Rainer managed to do it. I mean, I think he told me at the very least way back then that he was like, "Oh, I learned it just fine. Took me a short time." I was like, "That's very impressive." I cannot.
Snoot uses it as well. I remember Snoot was the pioneer of this, and I actually based all of my mechanics changes off Snoot, and that's the one that was a sticking point for me as well, where I was just like this is such a drastic change to how you control fights. And for me, I like my edge scrolling. Maru and most of the Koreans, I'm pretty sure, still edge scroll.
Yeah, it's very old edge scroll, really hard.
What I found interesting is Maru has his scroll speed on only 40%, where most of us use 90 or 100%.
Oh, but mine is very low. Mine is 20.
What? 20? The default? Yeah. Really? That's so
20,
slow.
Or 25. I can boot up.
Can you please boot up StarCraft right now and tell me? Because 20 is insanely low. When I heard Maru used 40, my mind was blown.
Okay. Do you know why it's slow? It's slow because I remember Day 9 daily telling me in the mechanical daily that most of your movement should be with hotkeys and scrolling is bad. And in general, I was like, that's great. And I don't want a big scrolling speed. And whenever I see someone with very high scrolling speed, which I actually, yeah, you do have a big one. For me, it's way too jumpy. I really don't like this. I know a lot of really good people function with that.
You get used to it very quickly. I think this is one of the things. If you moved it up, you would get used to it in one day, like so quickly. I think there's a decent argument, but I do think 25 or 20% is too low. I think 40% should be the minimum.
I have 25.
Yeah, I think that's.
I've never even thought about changing it. For me, I really like it. I will never change it.
I think anytime there's like a tank bush between your rallies, you're trying to set up a flank, you're trying to micro against Baneling's Ravager on your third and your natural at the same time. Yeah, if you're using camera locations, it's better. If you split your units in control groups really well, it's better. But for me, I much prefer just having that higher scroll speed. So it's an interesting thing because like I think it would be better if you raised it. At the same time, none of us really know with mechanics. It's not a science, right? We all have our options, and as much as I like to have strong opinions on these things, at the end of the day, people are like, oh, so should I change to what you think is the best? And I'm like, no, like you should do whatever obviously works for you, right? It's how the game feels to you. That is interesting though. So I'm actually going to go look at some VODs of your stream later tonight and just watch your movement because I hadn't noticed it looking that slow when I've watched your stream. So I'm going to be curious to like watch some of those fights. And the thing is, it probably makes you way more efficient, like you said, with your hotkeys and your double tapping and your camera locations, right?
I have been described as an efficient player because my RPM is like not so high. It's like barely 300, and compared to most pro players these days, it's almost slow, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, at the very least, I think efficient is. I don't do too much spamming in general. Yeah. I mean, in the early game I do, but in the middle of a game, very quickly, I don't anymore.
I don't think you need it. I mean, SOS's APM's quite slow. I remember Daishi, yeah, he's like a pro gamer of a past era, but he was like sitting at 120 APM, and he looked like any other pro gamer with how he was playing for the most part.
Yeah, like for me, it's very important when I look back on my VOD. It's like, or someone playing in general, it's like, okay, what did you actually do in those 10 seconds?
Yeah.
It's a question I really often ask is like, you can play very fast, but if you didn't do anything, then it's useless. And it's a very, very important question. I think it's much more important than like how much action you can do.
The saying I always like to go back to when I talk about this is organized urgency, right? You want to be trying to be quick. You want to do things fast. But the moment you lose organization with what you're doing and you're just like, I'm just fucking clicking on things, the moment it loses its point, right? Like, there's that great feeling. Okay, example. All the Terrans, it's probably already not being used that much at pro level. Let me know. Uthermal did the little guide on, the 2 Widowmine drop into the Marine tank push with the Liberator. So they hit all 3 bases at once, where they try to build bunkers at your third base. That build's really common. And then I had like a moment yesterday where for the first time, I scouted it really early. And I was like, oh, this is a 2 Widow Mine drop, and he's already building tanks. And I knew the exact response I wanted to do off my build. And it was like so quick and efficient. And within like 5 seconds, I had everything set up. And I knew exactly what was going to happen next, and then next, and then next. And there was like a burst of activity. But it's never the actual speed of clicking things. It's the fact that I'm planning ahead and I know what has to happen in what order that many things come together. And I always feel like there's this beautiful feeling as a StarCraft player. When you identify something early enough, you know exactly what's going to happen. You know exactly your response. And you just hit it in the exact order. And it's like the perfect efficiency of your actions happening at the right time. So I always feel like that's one of the most satisfying things as a pro player, right? Where that's where you get peak efficiency. It's not, am I clicking really fucking fast? It's, do I know what to do and in what order?
Yeah, like, it's for me, it's hard to describe for people that don't play the game professionally or just like play the game a lot in general. There is a big difference in the feel of a game when it's a very practice situation and when it's not. Because like, when it's a very practice situation and you're doing something and you've practiced this a lot, there's going to be like a big thing that's going to go into your mind. It's going to increase in size, and it's like build a forge, build a forge, build a forge, build a forge, and then you instantly like F2, build a forge, go back to army.
Yeah.
And in a practice game, let's say I'm going Archon drop, for example, and I'll do it, and I know exactly this. Like even right now, when I said Archon drop and I visualize an Archon drop in my mind, I immediately clued an ops, press F2, or made a forge. Like just right now saying it out loud. But if I was not having this very practice, I would only do this after I finish like microing
your Archons.
my Archons.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was like the big thing. The quality of an Archon drop player was like you would have to like fight queens that were literally hitting your prism, but while they were doing that, you had to go back to base to build a forge. That was the big thing like about the build that I really liked. It's like you could be very good at it if you could just macro even though it was in danger.
That's one of the hardest things, I think, that like Terran has to have a lot of that, because Terran's such a harassment focused race with the way most people play it. In the early first 5-6 minutes, you need to remember the points where while microing something, there's something you always have to do at a certain time. Like in TVT, my 2 Reapers and Hellions run up the ramp into their Reapers and Hellions, and at that exact moment, I need to queue a Cyclone because the Tech Lab has just finished on my factory, and if I don't queue that up and I lose that fight, I'm fucked by the counterattack, right? And it's like there's these little timing points where you memorize them. So it's incredibly satisfying to hit those. I also think, though, one of the most satisfying games is when you have the Chaos games, right? Where everything is fucking unprepared because you're both thrown into this weird zone, but you both are kind of you're still grabbing pieces of set plays. Like you're grabbing, oh well, like I should normally like take a third and get a forge and add charge here, right? Like forge and twilight and a third base. This is like a generally good thing while I scout for the next step. But it's those games I think that go off book into this like totally new zone where you're both playing well and adapting, but it feels like such a unique experience, and the game just goes down this long close fought path. Those are the games where I can lose a long hard game. Not always, but often I can feel good after losing a game. Like I've almost like I've won even though I lost the game, because it was just such a fun reactive game and it was so unique. Do you ever have that experience in tournaments?
This is related to the point. Don't worry. Do you watch Rick and Morty?
Of course. Yeah, I recently rewatched the whole show.
Do you remember this episode where it starts and they're both in the spaceships and they just kind of save the galaxy? They go do an epic action shit. They blow up some alien spaceships or whatever.
Yes.
And then they do shit. And then they just go back to a parking lot and they both break them crying like, I was not in control in the situation. I thought I was going to die. Holy fucking shit, Morty. We almost died here. I was not in control at all. I was just crying. This is me when I win a game, when I lose control and know what's happening. Like, you enjoy it? I do not, because I cannot use this. I cannot replicate it in the tournaments. And if it happens in a tournament, I'm happy, but I know I got lucky. Like I wish I would enjoy this situation more, but I don't really.
You know, I feel like when it's a funny thing. Maybe it's when I'm in a good mindset that I enjoy that chaos and I flow with it. Because I do have the same experience where I feel like everything that's an unexpected, unpracticed thing, I get more frustrated and angry, and by the end of the game, I'm absolutely depleted and exhausted. Like you've described, that feeling of just like, just like fuck this shit. Like, but I feel like when I'm at peak focus, I thrive on that chaos, and maybe it's a different just approach to StarCraft, a different thing that I get a kick out of in the game, because I'm a bit more of an intuitive player naturally than a preparation player. Like I'm someone who likes to dictate the pace of the game and force my situation. I do find kind of defending and adapting a bit hard, and I guess you are more of a defensive guy. Like you're very preparation build oriented. You've got these real nice decisive builds. I've been copying a lot of your PvP builds recently because I love some of your timings. Like I love your expand, and then you just do the sentry stalker push with the proxy third gateway after doing your nexus in PvP.
Yeah.
I saw you do that to parting and just bop him with a sentry stalker push, and I was like, oh my god, I love that build order.
Yeah, it depends. Like, I don't mind sitting doing nothing if it means I'm gonna win. But in general, I'm kind of known as like the aim of Protoss guy that's gonna aim of you with no fear. So I like doing nothing, being greedy, and aim moving. It's usually how I win.
I mean, I was a Zerg player. Anyone who likes to aim move to victory is a man after my own heart. Especially playing from Australia, where I play with lag, I try to avoid back and forth micro interactions. If there's like an army with ghosts and I have an army with High Templar and we're trying to feed back EMP dance, even before the EMP buff, I was like, get the fuck out of this situation as quickly as possible and send 30 zealots into a mineral line because I don't want to be in this dance. It's too hard.
Yeah, we have that in common. The last time I actually successfully feedback the ghost was maybe 3 years ago. Like the EMP burst being rough, man, real rough.
Yeah, dude. My favorite is trying to storm drop on 200 ping. You don't get a storm off ever. The High Templar always die or get EMP'd as they drop. I'm like, this is so depressing. Oh man, it's kind of funny though. How there are those different sorts of enjoyments in the game. So like I said, I enjoy the chaotic game. I enjoy dictating the pace. You had a really I was triggered for you. You're probably a bit annoyed. Your TSL series versus Dongregu. The corner-cutting, greediest Zerg of all time. I'm going to rush Mutalisks without even getting a Roach War in every game. I mean, what's it like dealing with that sort of series?
Yeah, I wasn't annoyed at losing. I was annoyed that the games were really shit. That's the main thing that really bothered me. I don't mind. I mean, on a strategical level, I don't mind it too much. It was...
Do you mind sharing a breakdown of it? Is it like just you needed to like stop going 3 Oracle and just do sharp timing attacks because he was just being too greedy?
Well, in general, going Oracle and NA ping is a bad idea, or at the very least I can't really play it well, so maybe I could have gone for something else. But the main thing was that it's gonna sound like a very small thing and very silly, but all of the European are very big on the perfect way to play. And the perfect way to play in the European ZVP is you don't make a single Zergling against the third base.
Mm-hmm.
And Sue and Donregu both did that. And for me, usually it's enough to like, because if I don't get too annoyed with the Zergling, then like the Zealot Archon timing literally just kills Donregu. But because I'm a bit in the dark and a bit like annoyed out of my game, I just loses. And it might seem silly, like, well, surely you're not gonna lose to 10 Zerglings. But sometimes that's all it takes, because if it's someone that does something unusual, then they cut corner. Like, you can just win by just that. And it's funny, because I watched Showtime against Sue after I lost to Sue. And Sue just destroyed Showtime 3-0 with the exact same thing. Zerglings, Roaches. Where, like, Europeans usually don't.
It's like that. Sometimes it's a different meta. And I mean, Dongregu especially is like a particularly weird version of it, where he's been doing really well in Korea against top Protoss players. Because he just cuts corners no other Zerg would even think to cut right now. They're like, no, that would be too greedy. And he's like, no, I'm just going to do it. We're going to build 40 Zerglings and then 70 drones and then 20 mutas at once. Like everyone else is like, but you die to this. And Dongrigu's like, well, those aren't happening in this game, I hope. And you're like I watch him play, and it's this disregard for safety in the matchup.
You know what's really funny? After losing to Dongregu, I played one tilt ladder game.
And you rage queued into ladder?
I mean, sometimes you do, So I played with one game, and I'm playing a Zerg on Simulacrum. And like, all right, let's play one good game. And the Zerg went overload speed, So that's already a much better game. Drones up to 66 while losing some drones. Make some safety roaches. Drums up the fourth base a little bit. Then make some more units, and then he just died to my A move. Like, never went to my side of the map. Always tried to scout what I was doing. Made some safety units where he thought he could need some. And that was the easiest game of my life. And it's very funny with StarCraft Theaters, because that Zerg was very good. A very good Zerg. But the difference between cutting corner and not cutting corner is so huge. You can gain so much, like, MMR, quote unquote, just by doing that.
Yeah.
So that's part of the game. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as cool, I think.
Well, it's powerful. It's so powerful. And the thing about StarCraft is you both, bam, dive in. Here's 30 Zerglings to cancel your third. But you can also do that. Well, I'm just going to skip the Roach Warren and roll the dice on this one, and or skip the Spore Crawler in the main and just defend with queens and have 6 drones early, which turns into 10 drone advantage, which turns into a ridiculous Hydra Bane timing that's like way stronger than normal, right? There's ways you can constantly fuck with your opponent in the game. When I look at you as a player, I do think you're someone who, if the opponents have like a trump card against you, if they can find your Achilles heel, it's throwing you into like an unexpected weird zone, right? Where I often feel like you can be so good when you're on the path you understand. But if I had to identify from the outside an area where I was like, where could Drogo improve? Maybe it is the being comfortable with the game getting fucking weird. Do you agree with that? That maybe that's your weakness, like the game getting weird?
It's like, I do agree with you, but you don't have to make it sound so ominous. The truth is, I'm just fucking greedy. Like, when I go against Serral 2-2 against Serral and lose 3-2, a big part of it is because I am the one going greedy, and sometime I will feel like I need a certain level of greed to compete against some players, and that's when I get punished. It's difficult these days, for example, to go against a Zerg, and instead of getting a third base very fast against 2 Oracle, I go 4 gas, a Robo, I whop 5 gates units, then I take a third base. If I play this game, I will see stats play like that, I will see showtime play like that, but I refuse to play like that. One of the big things I'm really against, I was going to use the word, how can I use a word that doesn't sound too weird? I'm just going to say it. I don't want to play a game and feel like a cuck.
Like you're being too safe, right? Like you're just being too afraid of everything all game.
I really dislike just being safe for no reason. I'm just going into a game that feels too difficult for no reason when I could fix the problem beforehand. So for every game that you see me like lose because I lose control, I will actually win a lot of games because I actually play the way I do. But this game, it's not as obvious that I win them. When you lose, it's very obvious. When you win, it's not as obvious. I do agree. Like, I could have a lot of ways I could improve, historically, I have lost to really big all-ins more than I've lost to straight macro game. But yeah, it's just the way I play, and that's the way I want to fix the issues. It's not necessarily by starting playing very safe.
So if you were to play DRG again, so like with that mindset, right? You don't want to be a cock. I love that way of putting it because it actually this is my language as well. We live on the internet. There's some people who are watching who don't spend as much time in Twitch chat as us and on Reddit. It's part of our vocabulary. I used to make fun of it. Now it's just part of my vocabulary. I literally call the Raven interference matrix cuck matrix because it just makes a unit a cuck. It's just like, oh, have sex with the rest of my army. I'm just going to watch, It's like, it's a great word. It's so good. So I look at that DRG series, for instance, and some of these situations, I say, cool, like I am totally down. I think the whole idea of, let's play purely defensive and overly safe. I think that's lame as well. I think the idea of like, okay, I got countered by some bullshit, like let's double down and sit in my shell. But I love the idea of, and maybe this is because I'm not playing at a pro level since a long time and I play on the NA ladder, but for me it's, let's stab the other guy in the throat. Like that is my is like, let's go hit a really sharp timing to fuck with the other guy's build order because I think he's getting away with some bullshit. So I look at that DIG series and I'm like, if I was teleported into your body with Drogo's abilities, I would choose like a very aggressive 2-base timing that's a bit tricky to start the series immediately. Like I would try to do a very sharp, maybe a big adept attack, maybe an immortal all in, something to just try to fucking kill him. Because like I think is being greedy. Like how do you approach the DIG series again if you could just play it right now?
I mean, to be fair, I probably should have looked up what DIG actually played. Because I was lacking the info that he liked to do this kind of sort of thing. And just losing to it one game doesn't really necessarily mean he's gonna do it the very next game. Yeah, I mean, if I were to play him again right now, obviously I would feel a lot more comfortable just
Yeah.
knowing about that in general. Because I don't think he's very good, but he was not like the top tier game in a standard game.
So you think you'd maybe like just like like keep the units wedged in between the minerals at the third nexus, keep an oracle at home to stop him denying your third, like just little adjustments?
You don't have to be so fancy. Yeah. Like what I could do, for example, is just keep an oracle at home always, had the gates a bit earlier, and just do like one of these weird 55 probes. I poke the fourth base timing because mine gates were pretty delayed because of the zerglings. Like
Yeah.
both games where I just have my prism die in the middle of the map because of Mutalisk. If you give me 30 more seconds, I win both games like on the spot, just like that. And then it's the reason why you can't go Mutalisk like this, because you just die usually. So it's very weird sometimes. It's actually an interesting question. When you lose to something, do you do the blind counter, or do you do the thing that you know is good usually, and also could be good against this? And I think when you start doing blind counters, that is how you can usually lose to lesser players, which is a very bad feeling, but sometimes I think you have to go through. There's no right answer here. Sometimes it's correct to do one, sometimes it's correct to do the other, but you have to decide as a player what you want to go for.
I think that's like a very nice diplomatic way of putting it. I'm gonna have a hard opinion and say in a best of 5, it's always worth the risk. Have you watched the series? I don't think you've watched the replays or the VODs, right?
Not so much, but I know what happened.
Yeah, because he was the greediest motherfucker you've ever seen. So I think like in a series like this where he is so extremely corner cutting, I think, and it's 5 maps, you can always afford one. I think you've always got to take the risk of punishing because your opponent is taking too many edges, is being too greedy, is being too much of a douchebag. And I think it's good to do that to start, to put the fear in them and then go back to the other way. And it's obviously, like you said, like this is me having a strong opinion because I think it's partially because I believe it, partially because I also think it's just more interesting to push the discussion this way and explore that concept more, right? I'm not trying to tell you, you're wrong, Drogo, but I do want to put, like, just think about it more and kind of mull it about in our brains. So I think he cut a lot of corners. And I think, who knows, maybe if you watched the VODs or the replays, you got the bird's eye view, you'd have more of an appreciation. As a Zerg player watching, my mind was blown that he would be so greedy. He was like, as long as I'm pressuring with Lings and he's building oracles, he felt like he could just get away with everything behind it. Yeah. What do you think? In a best of 5, a best of 7, do you take more gambles? Or do you just use it as more insurance with your macro builds? What do you think?
I think you really have to avoid falling into mental traps with thinking about this. I think it's very easy for players to fall into the concept of like, okay, the first time I'll play him, I'll throw a rock just to make him feel safe. Then I hit him with the scissors. It's like, statistically, buddy, you can do any combination. They're all as effective. And I really believe that independently of what is common wisdom about best of 5 preparation, there's always a best path to wins. Like really, really, really often. When you see Black parting, going for a Blink Soccer build 3 times in a row against Maru, that was the best way to play that one. Like, genuinely. The one...
Like, because it was the right... Because it was an effective strategy? Or, like, you think because it's the combo, because he's also really good at that strategy?
Yeah, well, it was mainly because he was really good at it. But the ratio you should always look at it is how easy you make the game for yourself, and how hard it makes it for your opponent. Sometimes it's really easy to make a game extremely easy for you to play, but then you also make it very easy for your opponent, so it's maybe not that interesting. And sometimes making the game hard for yourself also equally makes it hard for the opponent, so it can be worth it. Obviously, you want to have the best ratio of it's easy for you, hard for your opponent, but it's not always possible. So sometimes counterintuitively, strategies that are really easy to play against are going to be the good call because they're also very easy for you. So obviously here, since you're arguing about a series where I got smashed 3-0, I look kind of silly talking about that.
No, no, no.
But
It's all theory.
I think everybody has their own approach
Yeah.
to series preparation, and I don't think anyone is giving Cyril shit for playing the same standard with 5 games in a row in his series because he wins every single time. So in
Yeah.
general, this discussion about changing strategy is always coming to a losing player that happened to maybe like play the same way twice and be like, hey, why didn't you play more aggressive? But the other side of the coin is if you do shitty all in or it don't work, when you look fucking stupid and people don't even ask the question, they're just like, oh, that guy's just a shitty all in player. So in general, every time there's a discussion, I'm just like really being on like the insight is 2020 buddy, and I'll try to I keep it in mind because sometimes it's true. Sometimes I do get too deep into my own ways. I completely agree with that, but I don't like common wisdom in StarCraft 2, and I try to stay.
You think like you can't just apply a one size fits all rule, right? It's always got to be for that series, like for that player, and your skills in that matchup as well, right?
And yourself specifically. I think you should know yourself a lot, and that's where all of the decisions should come from.
You know, on the point of like, I actually was very much when Cyril was looking really good but not winning yet in 2017. I was like, he needs to change it up. This guy's really good, but until he adds variety, because I've always had the view, and historically it's been correct, that the best StarCraft 2 players will not let their opponent play their game consistently. So someone like even MVP, who is the best defensive player in Wings of Liberty, he 2-raxed a lot, right? And that was part of his success. Life did a lot of early pools. You know, a lot of the champions, and so my knowledge kind of looking at it, at the people who'd been the most successful, is most of them would always mix in 1 in 3 or 1 in 5, a very cheesy or timing attack or pressure-based opening to, you know, take the comfort away from their opponent and try to exploit weakness, right? So for me, I was actually someone who, what blew my mind with Sarah was like, I was like, oh my, he kept just grinding the macro game and kept doing it 5 games in a row and made it work. And I was like, I didn't expect that. But at the same time now, people are giving Cyril shit the other way. Like you said, his cheeses aren't working. And people are going, oh, that's so dumb. Why didn't he just play macro? And like you said, hindsight's 2020. I'm on the other fence. I think Cyril should work harder at those cheesy builds and those situations. I think if he's going to keep doing them, he's got to go deeper and commit more to it until he gets better at executing them. I think right now, we're not seeing Cyril choose the wrong strategies. I think we're seeing him lose track of where he is because he just doesn't have enough experience in those games. And he's still an incredible player. But I think like the few series that he's been getting criticism for, it's actually him not investing in being good enough at those, the rock strategy that he throws out there to fuck with his opponent. And I think we see a drop in his level of play in those situations. So I actually am someone who really thinks it's like one of the most powerful things in StarCraft is impinging your opponent. But it's something that's so easy from the sidelines to talk about. As a player, I was never able to figure out when to mix that cheese or that aggression in at the right time. I never knew how to choose it against the player. I would sometimes fall apart even after getting ahead with aggression. So it's something which I can say from the sidelines, but I absolutely had no experience ever putting into place myself.
Yeah, it's like what you said about Cyril. I would never, like, I don't know. I would have to ask Cyril, like, what you say could be true, or it can be completely fucking false, like, depending on how it actually is for Cyril. I really, really, really think it's something that's really undervalued, I think, in this discussion is the level of how comfortable a player is doing some stuff. And if you just tell him, well, just be more comfortable with that. It's like, thanks for the tip, buddy. And I always find it a little bit not all that useful. Well, it is true that
it's more about putting the practice into it, though, right? Like it's more about if you're going to do that in the tournament, it needs to be something you've put the effort into getting comfortable with it, right? It's not just be comfortable with it; it's put a crazy amount of practice, review, and focus.
How do you know he didn't put the practice?
I don't, but
because he lost.
That's it's when you see someone fall apart in a game and suddenly you see someone playing well and then make some bad decisions suddenly. And this happens to everyone in StarCraft, right? It's always there's a point where you know what to do and then you make the bad decision and it's often the losing point. So it's not about that, but I do feel like it's, you know, it's maybe he did and maybe it's just he needs to lose some games and have those situations and give it more time. So I think I'm just kind of advocating the fact that you can't just instantly get good at something in StarCraft, and like you've got to have a really long-term view. Like you've got to put so much time and preparation into it. Like you said, you can't just say, oh, it's the right time to cheese right now, do a 2-base charge load immortal timing. You're like, I haven't practiced that in 3 weeks. You can't do that. So for me, it's more part of the practice regimen. In my head, what I think is the best way to play, and obviously, like we've said, there's so many question marks, is to have a little bit more systematic practice, to have a few of those sharp all-ins in your hand, like up to date, confident, well practiced.
I mean, you can defend that, but in general, I don't like putting too much emphasis and almost what I would call storytelling. It's like, oh, Cyril is not winning now. He has to change up his play. No. Cyril won BlizzCon, being the most solid player of all time. You should keep doing what's good, not what makes a good story. So I would want him to almost just go back to that, being this fucking beast, multitask god, that just can't be touched by anybody even though they gamble their ass off. Yeah. That's also a good story, funnily enough, so my argument is not that good.
Well, I mean, maybe, right? Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's like we didn't really see that. Obviously, we talk about Cyril as an example, but I mean, it's the same story happens to every player. Where I think who knows? Maybe there's like a month or two where it's like, oh, I'm losing practice now. Oh, not having the Broodlords with the extra range against Terran. I can't finish games in the late game, or whatever the thing is, or maybe it's just not coming together. And I mean, you might touch on a valuable point. Like, what if you as a player, you just can't win your macro games? And you kind of knee-jerk and you go, I'm going to start just practicing cheese 80% of the time in wild aggressive games because it's not working for me. What if you just needed to practice another week or two to learn some more and understand how to start winning those macro games, right? I mean, I don't think the eggs should always be in one basket. But I guess the question comes down to, like, you've only got so much mental bandwidth. You've only got so much practice time. How much do you put into the aggressive play? How much do you put into the defensive, more standard reactive play? Like, what is that split? So off the top of your head, like right now, what do you think your split is between like more timing attacks and more reactive solid play? Is it like 80-20 macro aggression or?
I can't give you a number, but I can give you a quick rundown on matchups.
Yeah.
In PvP, I think it's all about how you handle the early game. And if you handle it well enough, you almost always can win with an attack. So I try to play like that because I think it's the best. In PvT, I'm not good enough at the blink shit. But I think, in theory, if you are very good at it, and you can have a good read on what the Terran does, you can get yourself into position where eventually you win. But some maps are good for timing attacks, but you should almost never try to rely on them. And PvZ, there's a few cheers build can be pretty good. But I much rather would like to play in a game where I don't get cucked too much in the early game. And then I think mid-game, you can have a very strong case for winning a big fight right before Broodlord. If you don't lose too much to Banelings, and you just accumulates a lot of Archons and Stormers. That's historically how I won most of my PvZ, and I try to keep it that way because I still think it's pretty good. And it's going to be really good after the patch. So that's how I view my games in general.
We're going to see some more plasma shields, yeah? Double Forge? No,
Double Forge not that good.
It's too expensive, right? Oh,
yeah, it is too expensive.
And it's like one extra Baneling and Archon or
it's
something.
It's always funny when I see a guy goes like, why do you guys think about plasma shield instead of +3 in X matchup? I was like, did Zest do it? Yeah, it was Zest. All right. No.
You did it at BlizzCon, mate. You did it at BlizzCon 2016. Remember my old video about upgrades?
Yes, because back then people literally went Link Bane with no Ravager.
Yeah.
So it was actually good back then. But these days, every time someone tries to be a little bit of a hipster with their Forge upgrade, the mother's like, you better show me some numbers, pal, because I'm not buying it until I see them.
Yeah, I like fucking around with Double Forge, but even then it's armor upgrades, and it's like for Zealot run by efficiency and Immortals versus Hydras. It's actually like plasma shields are so expensive. It's kind of silly. But I mean, I'm back to the point there about the aggression. It's very matchup focused, right? So if you let's take PvP for example, you're very focused on the early aggression and push timings and dynamics with that. So it's very aggressive focused, right? It's all these like tight build orders to kind of get your opponent, catch them out. and then it often just kind of finishes in the early mid game, right, with a big fight. So I guess if you look at that, is there do you ever like every now and then review a matchup and kind of go like, okay, let's take a step back and try to think if I could mix in something even cheesier, or if I could mix in something where like off my early Stalker Immortal push with the Prism, where I try to pick off a few units on the natural while probing, should I work more on Adepts? Is it something you feel you plan out ever, or is it something that really, I feel like most of the time as StarCraft player, you're usually just focusing on, you know what, Glaives is really good right now. Like I've watched this stats game or whatever, and there's this really good Glaives timing and it just feels good. There's a lot of like intuitive problem solving because there's so many things you've got to calculate, right? So often you just kind of go with what feels good and kind of what pops to mind, right?
Yeah, like it's the big struggle of a StarCraft 2 Pro, because you have to differentiate what feels good and what actually wins games. Sometimes these two are the same thing, sometimes they're very different. And I'm not quite sure in PvP. Like, to be honest, for example, for an evolution, that's pretty basic for me. I like Stalker Sentries in PvP. I like the philosophy of it. I like how games plays out with it. I do not like the fact that it's not strictly viable. You lose to Proxy Robo every single time, and there is a couple of niche openings that are also very hard to deal with. But for the longest time, I was like, I don't really want to play anything else, because, like, fuck me, dude. Opening 2 Stalkers when macro feels bad, it just feels worse.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to do. And then eventually I found I died to potting going Frigate, and I was like, Frigate is shit. When I play my safe opening, I always beat it. But then I was like, wait a minute, I'm the only one playing that. Maybe we should give it a try. And I destroyed everybody going Frigate. It was a great week. I was very fun, and yeah, pretty much that opened my eyes a lot on like the matchup and what I could do. Just the fact that even making a few Stalkers, you could it wasn't an all-in, it was a macro opening. That's the big switch I had in my mind that I didn't have before. And yeah, so that was the big thing I did in PvP. Before that, I've tried a lot of proxy Stargate, a lot of mass adept opening, but none of them clicked for me. That's a big thing too in StarCraft. Sometimes stuff will just click with you. Like, yeah, this opening is great, I'm digging it. It just meshes well with your style. And that's great when this strat is also something that's good, because sometimes you're gonna mesh with some dumb shit, and you're gonna try to hang out to it for dear life, but it's just dog shit, and you should have dropped it 2 months ago. Why are you still going?
Stop beating the dead horse.
Yeah.
That's so interesting, because like I feel like especially Protoss is a very build order oriented race in many ways, and there's lots of, you want to cut corners at the right time. You don't just build units nonstop. You want to, I always wonder, should there be like if I was a coach for a player, one-on-one, full time, I get paid this salary just to be a coach for a team or a player, I imagine I'd just have like spreadsheets of builds, and I'd have like kind of writing down why it's good and the situation it's good in, because I feel like a build can be 2 months old, you don't use it because it stopped working, and often it just gets forgotten. And I kind of feel like there are Protoss players and just StarCraft players in general who are a bit better at bringing back the old build when people have forgotten about it, and it's like perfect for the meta, and like they just pick up so many more free wins than other players, right? Because people just aren't expecting it and are like, whoa, what is this thing?
Yeah,
like those old builds.
The time where you see this the most is when there's a map pool rotation. Because some build they die because of balance changes, but some of them die because of map pool. And that's always great when you bring back a build, because this new map has like a very short, main base to third base distance, so you can do some weird shit. I also have a couple of builds I like to bring back fairly often, or just try.
Yeah.
It's always pretty fun.
It feels good when you pull them out and they work. I always think it would just be, I wish I was more organized and I just had this spreadsheet, so I could almost when I'm stuck in a matchup, go back and kind of look through the spreadsheet and just have a little think about the builds and have a link to a VOD of each one and just kind of go, you know what, that might actually work really fucking well on this map, or you know what, no one checks for that pylon there anymore. Let's bring that back because people aren't proxying much. There's so much to think about though, so I find it hard to store it all in your brain as a pro player.
And also, I have a real life example actually. Sometimes it's not the map pool, it's not the meta game changes. Real life example. I am Katowice, Zest, finish, seconds. Pretty much doing the same added build every single PvZ. The
Yep.
thing is, mad optimize and requires a extremely optimized response, which Cyril didn't have, so he lost. And now that means that the metagame changed so that when Zerg will see the sign of an Adeptal lane, they will react a certain way, included but not limited to making a fuck ton of units.
With
Now
no lair, right?
now the new hotness is to make lots of Zerglings roaches. So I had a very cool build that was like a 7-gate robo. It was the same principle. You just take probes of gas and make a lot of gateway units. I practiced this build a lot for Nation War to try to kill Sauron Raynor. Almost worked for Raynor. And I was like, okay, that's great because I can always use this build later to bring it back. And I'm like, wait, right now when people see this, then they're not gonna realize it's this, but they're gonna make a lot of units anyway. So like, I'm walking into a perfect blind counter. This is pretty bad. So the smart thing to do is just to try to make DTs instead of adepts because we don't have a layer, so it can be kind of cool. But it's sad, you know. But I'm really excited for when the adept build is gonna be considered bad, and maybe I can 7-gate turbo some people. But it's not gonna be until a while.
Yeah, it's so funny like that. Like I remember there was a meta where this is such a low level example. You'll laugh at this. Everyone was always just defending with like roaches and skipping link speed, and just like really going for like the heavy economy roaches and like an overseer. And then I started just doing an immortal drop every game. Like just get the robo before warp gate as soon as the core is done. Immediately chrono 2 immortals, put them in the prism, and just run around picking off roaches and laughing and going, yeah, because they would play like 3 or 4 queens max, like very few queens. So they'd either have to pull all their injecting queens or they'd just be running roaches in and just like pick off a drone. And it's just this funny thing where I remember then trying to bring it back a few months later. I was like, oh, remember that build? That was so much fun to do, you know? And like everyone was defending with just 7 queens and like 30 Zerglings every game to anything Protoss did. And I'm like, oh, 2 immortals and a warp prism is actually worthless. Like I'm lucky to kill a creep tumor and 1 Zergling with this drop. Like the queens and lings don't give a fuck and they make 70 drones. And I was like, oh yeah. So it's kind of funny how things rotate in the meta as well. It's really hard to organize all that. I guess we should finish up pretty soon. I've kept you for so long. A final point. What's your process like for reviewing games that go on? Do you have any set up habitual process after you lose a tournament or you're doing bad in a matchup where you go back and review your VODs, or you kind of rebuild? You say, let's scrap what I'm doing, let's go watch VODs of other players and try to emulate someone else's style and rebuild. Is there ever a way you try to correct your mistakes, review your progress, or rebuild how you play a matchup? I guess the best example is you lose a tournament game. Do you have a process 2 days later? You load up the replays, you write notes, you think of how you can fix it and how you would approach the series, you look for consistent errors. What's it look like for you? Is it organized? Run us through what you do after losing a tournament to review it.
First thing first, start organized. Not one bit. Second thing, I usually...
Yeah, we good. We're back. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. Apologies today. Third technical difficulty. We just got cut off there in the middle of Drogo's sentence. So we was just asking about your process after tournaments and how you go over the wins, the losses, try to learn from what happens. And you said point 1, it's not organized, and point 2, and in comedic fashion, it cut off at that exact moment when you're about to drop some knowledge.
Yeah, well, point 2 was that I don't value tournament losses too much because I do believe that you should look at your practice, I think, more than the tournaments, because there's just more games in general. So it's more interesting to look at. Sometimes it is true that the tournament games usually have a different vibe than the practice game, so it's always interesting, but I think being too focused on them is a trap.
Yeah.
But so since I don't really look at the tournament losses, I just try to always look at okay, in practice, am I winning a lot of games? And if I'm not, how close really I am to winning games? And if all of the games I'm playing are not really close and I'm losing a lot, that's where I'll do a lot of research. Just looking over players, how do they win? What build did they do exactly? if my games they all feel kind of close, this is where it always a bit more trickier because sometimes you can have like good games, but you should still do something. But because you still have good games, you just keep going. So this is where the waters get muddy. But in general, like it's you win some games, right? So at the very least, you have that going for you. But
it's
very
hard
for me. Yeah,
yeah,
it is hard.
like if things are going well, I like that idea of it's like you're doing okay, but maybe you're missing the decisiveness to finish the game at the right point or something like that, right? Like it's hard to say where you should change if it's a matter of just small degrees here and there. Yeah.
Sorry, what's up? Sorry, I zoned out for a bit.
Oh, okay. I was just saying like how it's kind of like so if it's very small degrees that you're losing by, like you're having a bunch of good games and you win maybe 2 out of 6 games and the other 4 are still very close.
Yeah.
It's hard for you to identify where to improve, right?
Yeah, like it's always the worst is you lose often, but it always feels like you could have won the game. It's very, very hard to identify if you're like in the right degree. Because really often what's gonna happen is you're gonna play a matchup and the game is gonna feel pretty hard, but StarCraft's a hard game, so you're like, okay, it should be fine. And then way down the line you realize, oh, if I just do this instead of this, and then at this point in the game, I just build this later, like just small to middle adjustments, suddenly the game becomes much easier. You're like, oh, I could have done that so much earlier, but it's so hard to tell. Because the other side of the coin is, if you always try to change up everything, you're gonna waste a ton of time just trying to learn new build where you're always bad at them. It is difficult in that regard. You have to be sometimes you have to be confident in your guts. To be like, this is good. I want to practice it. This is good.
It's the classic thing, right? The Twitch chat jams. Why didn't he just do the thing? It's so obvious. Why is he just doing the same strategy that he just lost with? And it's like, well, part of what all pro gamers have is the stubbornness and the confidence to say, if I adjust that just a little bit, if I move that stalker and shut down that medevac, if I pull those probes away from that widow mine, I can win it. Repeat this game. I change a few things. I execute 5% better. I crush this game. You know, and you have to have the confidence to do that and keep doing the reps and grinding until you execute that well. And sometimes that's the way, just getting better, right? And then there's other times where you are making it too hard for yourself. And you, like you said, you know, you just need to learn. You just change one thing, one big thing in your opening or something, and suddenly the whole game flow is easier. I feel like, yeah, if I think about it, it's like, I guess the idea is like, you probably just want to like have some system for taking a step back every now and then and trying to think about the matchup in a different way. And that's kind of what you're always doing. You're practicing, you're watching VODs, you're looking at the way other players are playing. Is there any other player you kind of really study more than any others, or one that inspires you when you watch them play?
Showtime is very good. I think he's very good, but I'm probably not the best player for me to study. Like sometimes it's still ideas, but sometimes the real play is like, it's not the way I like to play.
Yeah.
And I think my favorite player was probably always Stats. Because like I really always enjoy Stats. I have a Stats thing on my desk. It's the only thing I have on my desk that is not computer related.
What is that? Is it the card, or it's not one of the
card, yeah.
Is it the WCS card?
It's the 2017 GSL final that you won against Sue. I was in Korea at the time.
Sick.
Yeah.
I thought you'd say stats, because I remember you playing a lot of different stats builds, and whenever I've talked to you about builds in the past, you do refer to his play a lot.
Yeah, like stats is cool. I always enjoyed stats and rain and Zest a little bit. Like I always felt like the player was the closest to, in sometimes style-wise, was Zest, but sometimes we differ in some aspects.
Yeah.
But the very much do you find a bullshit build and abuse the crap out of it. That's the Zest I love, and that's how I like to be sometimes. So Zest and stats, I just pick and choose a little bit. I try to play. Okay, a good way to play it is I try to play stats build like Zest would play them.
Yeah.
Is more or less how I would describe what I try to do in StarCraft 2.
That's it's kind of interesting to have those different influences, and I think sometimes players look up to a player who's actually totally different to them. And I'm like, oh, I don't even know if that's the right guy you should look to. But sometimes you you need someone to learn from who's the opposite of yourself, right? To at least not, you don't try to copy their style, but you learn little pieces of it. But then I think everyone has like their spirit animal player where they're like, oh my God, like you see that player when they're in the zone and you're a fan again, you're cheering for them, but you're also learning from them and copying and kind of, drawing energy from their builds. So I think like Stats is one of the greatest for that, but Zest in terms of just goddamn tight timings, man. Like his build orders are so well defined, and he's also just a trendsetter. I think Zest is one of the most influential players on the Protoss meta around the entire world. His builds almost always become, some variation of them becomes the norm, and he moves on to other builds and everyone else is still doing them and refining them and making them more reactive, while I feel like Zest is more of a like, no, I'm going to find a new build that I can really dictate the pace of the game with.
Yeah, I always remember having this conversation with Lambo, which I thought was a really interesting conversation in terms of like the mindset of things StarCraft. It was back when Stats won Isis Rogue against Cyril. I do not know if you remember. 3 Oracle, 6 gates, a robotic, 1 Prism and Immortal, you move out and you do either big damage or you end the game. And Lambo was like, it was like, mate, you can literally have the same number of units as Stats if you go 4 gates instead of 6, and then you can take much faster and be better in a macro game. I'm like, maybe that's true, but in a tournament where you make mistakes and you want to punish mistakes, 6 gates and the potential to make more units is gonna win you more games. And he was like, no, and he was right, he was 100% right. But at the same time, I think it was the correct call to go for more gates on a less refined build, but that can actually win more by just being in your fucking face.
It's also more reactive the way he'd do it, right? If he sensed weakness, he'd double down on the warp-ins, where there were other games where he'd start building probes a lot quicker and kind of just pretend he was attacking and not actually warp in constantly with all the gates. And I like that idea of builds. You have a bit more leniency on how tight they have to be to make it more tournament successful. It's like, no, like let's give myself a bit more room for freedom with this, because not everything's going to happen perfectly. And I mean, I personally feel, probably 4 gates. I don't think he would have won as many games with 4 gates. I mean, he escalated and got out of control in those games. It was actually sick.
Yeah. But it's a European style, we want to play a macro game. I'll play a macro game.
Just effing kill him. It's always, Europeans want to defend, Koreans want to attack, Chinese players want to drag you into the upside down and then attack. They'll create the weird aggression. And then, everywhere else is just bad. No. But it's kind of funny, man. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting so long with me. Apologies, of course, for the technical difficulties. I'm going to let you go now, man. So,
Right.
obviously, you are representing Raise Your Edge at the moment, right?
Yep.
Any shout-outs for anyone else besides them?
I mean, I'm gonna double down on Raise Your Edge a little bit. They're a great team. I really enjoy being with them right now. So if you guys could give them a follow and check out their stuff, that'd be great. Any other shout-outs? Well, not really. I mean, I'm just living life. Shout out to Apple Juice for carrying me for 3 hours.
A few people were asking in chat earlier. They were saying, "Oh, what's he drinking? What's he drinking?"
Yeah, I know. I looked very cool to you guys, didn't I? No, I don't know what to say. Shout out to Gaming for making great tournaments. Shout out to the community for always being here, and thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun talking.
Thank you so much for coming on, man. I this was actually just such a fun, natural flowing conversation. I feel like this is one of the most flowing conversations we've had where we just talk about a bunch of different things and all that sort of stuff. I think it would be great if it didn't get split into 3 different parts, but we are going to, of course, put this all together for the podcast and the YouTube video. I'll have to give a big bonus or a thank you or something to Helix to say thanks for all the crazy amount of work I've just created for him by letting my computer crash a few times. So this happened 2 shows in a row. I will be fixing it for the next week. We will be going through and stress testing and trying to change the setup to make sure it doesn't happen. Fingers crossed. We'll see how it goes. Well, thanks so much for coming on, mate. I really appreciate it. Obviously, we'll be following you in all the online cups, Twitter, Twitch, everything. If you guys want to follow Drogo, the links are right down below in the description. They're in chat as well. I'm going to link everything there one more time. I've also thrown in a link to Raise Your Edge Gaming, who I just followed on Twitter as well. So, guys, thank you very much for watching. Drogo, thank you for joining me. We'll see you all next time, guys.
Yep.